For the city of Petoskey, the city council meeting for June 6, 2022. I ask that you all rise with me for the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Ms. Platt, would you call roll, please?
Certainly. Demore. Present. Shields.
Here.
Wagner.
Here.
Walker.
Present.
Murphy.
Present. We have a quorum. Next is to hear a proclamation declaring June 6, 2022 as Arbor Day in the city of Petoskey. Arbor Day. Whereas in 1872, J. Sterling Morton proposed to the Nebraska Board of Agriculture that a special day be set aside for the planting of trees, and whereas the holiday called Arbor Day was first observed with the planting of more than 1 million trees in Nebraska, and whereas Arbor Day is now celebrated throughout the nation and the world, and whereas trees can reduce the erosion of our precious topsoil by wind and rain, lower our heating and cooling costs, moderate the temperature, clean the air, produce oxygen and provide habitat for the wildlife. And whereas trees are a renewable resource, giving us paper, wood for our homes, fuel for our fires, and countless other wood products. And whereas the trees of our city increase property values, enhance the economic vitality of the business areas and the beauty of our community. And whereas trees, wherever they are planted, are a source of joy and spiritual renewal. Now, therefore, I, John Murphy, Mayor of Petoskey, do proclaim June 6, 2022 as Arbor Day in the city of Petoskey. I urge all citizens to celebrate Arbor Day and to support efforts to protect our trees and our woodlands. And furthermore, I urge citizens to plant and care for trees, to gladden the hearts and promote the well-being of this and all future generations. I might want to add that thanks to Kendall in his efforts, we are a Tree City USA. There are 4 factors that he had to make sure and address and meet. One of them being the small one, but the other one is the forest, Kendall. I can name them, but I'll be slow at it.
And now he's got to do total recall.
We have to spend a certain amount of forestry dollars per capita. We need to have a staff person responsible for the forestry program. We have to do a proclamation and we have to do a tree planting event. So we are ready for recertification.
Okay.
We got all of those taken care of.
And where was our tree planted?
Pennsylvania Park.
Okay.
Yay.
So there we are. Okay. Any other questions or comments?
And Mayor, the proclamation, the day, Arbor Day, am I correct that it doesn't have to be this day? It can be within a range in the spring to summertime?
Yep, correct.
Well, does the public wish to state anything? If not, let's keep moving. Next is a presentation where we're going to hear from Beckett and Rader concerning the Little Traverse Wheelway West Side Connector schematic design. For that, I'm going to turn it over to City Manager Al Terry.
Sure, and I'll turn it over to Kendall Klingel-Smith, Parks and Rec Director, and he can start the program off, and I'm sure he'll introduce Tim Knutson from Beckett Rader.
Well, thanks. As you know, this has been a process that we've been going through for the last several years. In 2019, we noticed some fissures along the wheelway that we monitored. we saw in the fall. And then in April of 2020, we had the bluff collapse. We have done other studies with Baird and Associates, more of a slope failure study, to try to understand why what happened. And so we've gone through the process with the county and with Resort Township. And so the last kind of assignment that we did was to have Beckett and Rader, we contracted with Beckett and Rader, and we, to come up with engineer drawings and opinion of probable costs for a route that would be on the south side of 31. This route was identified for a few reasons. There is some trepidation to put any infrastructure back on bluffs. And that's a kind of a statewide trend we're seeing. So we wanted to have an option to explore, and we were directed by our elected officials to review this option on the south side of US 31. So there's been a lot of discussion, a lot of meetings, and a lot of reasons why what you're going to see tonight is where we are. So at the conclusion, I assume that Tim will leave some time for Q&A.
Thank you. Thank you. Tim Knudsen from Beckett and Rader. Thanks for having me here tonight and hearing the presentation. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Some of the content I have in the beginning is sort of a repeat from the introduction that Kendall just provided. So I'll just try to summarize that quickly. But the failure was first noticed in the winter 2020, and the trail closed from East Park to Magnus Park. And obviously concerns were raised regarding trail connectivity and how people will get around that closed segment, presumably using the US 31 shoulder, as started to happen that spring. Next slide, please. So as Kendall mentioned, a separate study to Baird Associates was initiated to get a handle on feasibility and preliminary costs to rebuild that failed portion of trail in its original location. Now, the city of Petoskey, Emmett County, and Resort Township, Top Michigan Trails Council, with the participation of MDOT, initiated a study to identify feasibility of adapting the roadway shoulder for short-term temporary use by pedestrians and cyclists. So this is where this all began. We were trying to find a route in 2020 or as quickly as we could after by modifying the roadway shoulder in some fashion. So during that study, we came to know that the road shoulder cannot be used formally for pedestrian and, well, I should say pedestrian use. It can be used for cyclist use, but there are some dimensional requirements that a road shoulder falls short of when you try to assign it to pedestrian use. And some of those are get to accessibility requirements, and some of them get to AASHTO requirements, but they all refer to safety. So we took that warning very loud and clear from MDOT that there's really no possibility to accommodate pedestrian traffic on a road shoulder. So we moved into this study. Keep the slide just for a second. We wanted to look at any trail that we could place in an efficient manner to reconnect the wheelway from west to east around that failure. So the failure section that you see in the slide is the dashed red line in the very center, and the dashed white line is the wheelway. So finding that route efficiently meant either, using the route along the lake, which is covered in a separate study, or trying to make use of the US 31 highway right of way to accommodate a portion or all of that trail. So on the north side of the highway, it should be a little bit more visible than it is, but there's an orange dashed line. So that's the north of US 31 highway trail route that we explored, and that would have begun at East Park and would have run to just past Epler, where there is an existing sidewalk that ends at the condominium complex there, just west of the
Do you have a
cemetery.
highlighter that you could, I'm not sure where you're talking about with that.
I don't.
They don't work on the screen.
Okay, yeah.
So real quickly, the orange trail was here. To about there. And there's existing sidewalk that runs from that point eastward, and that's where we would pick up the trail. So we studied the two routes. The green is the route on the south side of the highway. And ultimately, the project team selected the south US 31 right-of-way option for the following reasons. One, there was a big concern about shoreline bluff stability, which NDOT may or may not share. There was a concern regarding clearance from the roadway. There are a couple points where you can tell that the roadway is very close to the lake and there's nothing but steep bluff between. So it would have been pretty costly to establish a trail, particularly around that, what we were calling the Epler curve. Again, our preliminary cost was pushing us in the direction of the trail on the south side of US 31. One other thing that pushed us to that decision was that we would establish trail connectivity between the south side of US 31 and Resort Township and the Wheelway. So all of those businesses on the south side of 31 would have a pedestrian cyclist connection to the Wheelway, which is a benefit. So that was probably the last factor that played into the selection of this route. We can go to the next slide, please. So at this point, we dove into this study, which was a more detailed schematic design of what we're calling the south segment connector. So that included gathering topographic survey for the proposed trail segment, locating existing utilities within road rights of way, and make sure we consider utility replacement costs and schematic design. This was a pretty involved task, which meant getting in touch with the utility providers themselves and trying to get some mapping, type, size, location of existing utilities from them. We know if we modify the road shoulder to accommodate a trail, which is impervious pavement, we're going to have stormwater impacts. So we have to make sure we accommodate those stormwater impacts. And then lastly, we wanted to identify the particular challenges to implementation and most importantly, an opinion of construction cost. So these are the design and engineering influences or I guess guidelines and standards that we attempted to meet. So these address minimum trail width, the distance the trail has to be from the roadway, the type of visual and tactile identification at intersections so that no matter what your ability is, you know that there's a crossing there. Clearance from the trail for trail users. We want to make sure we don't surpass steepnesses with regard to longitudinal, but also cross slopes and our crosswalk locations. I'll mention that a little bit more later. AASHTO, which is the Guide for Development of Bicycle Facilities and the Guide for Planning, Design, and Operation of Pedestrian Facilities were taken in combination as design standards for the trail. And then importantly, the American Disabilities Act, which will identify what are maximum cross slopes, our maximum longitudinal slopes, and other elements of the trail that have to be met to meet accessibility. And then lastly, adhering to MDOT's design and engineering standards, which also happen to include the AASHTO and the ADA accessibility guidelines. So this is a really quick snapshot of what that trail looks like next to a roadway. So you can see the vehicle to the right is in the drive lane. Then we have a paved shoulder. Then we have a minimum 10 feet of separation from the edge of that pavement to the trail surface. Once we get to the trail surface, we have to have 10 feet of trail width, no greater than 2% cross slope, but also have to have a 2-foot shoulder on either side with no vertical obstruction. So for example, somebody can't catch a handlebar if they're cycling along that edge, if it's 2 feet clear space beyond the edge of the trail. So that's a quick picture of the guidelines we use. So in the study, our next chapter was design narrative, and I'm not going to walk you through the narrative for all 8 sheets because that would be a pretty exhaustive exercise. But if you pick up the study, this will show you sort of a snapshot of what you'll see if you do. So we basically utilize the topo survey that we received in AutoCAD and designed AutoCAD to that plan. Pulled existing utilities in from utilities providers, referred to previous MDOT construction drawings from 2015 and some regional GIS info, regional drainage patterns so that we get a grip on our stormwater impacts, and prepared a set of schematic design plans and representative cross sections. So for that length of trail that you see in green, we ended up with 8 drawing sheets. Each drawing sheet had 2 sections of trail on it, so really 16 different sections of trail, and we're just identifying them 1 through 8. Each drawing in the design narrative gets its own page, and if we go to the next slide, we start out with an aerial vision of what that trail segment is. So this, for example, is trail segment 2. This will be the second trail segment from East Park. And the reason I chose to show this one to you is because this is where the proposed tunnel crossing would take place. This is the only location along the roadway where we have the difference in elevation between the base of the shoulder and the top of the road to pass a tunnel beneath that roadway. So we start out the narrative with an aerial image to orient people with regard to where they're located. And then if you go to the next slide, excuse me, you should see the design narrative. And again, I won't take your time by reading all of this narrative. Some of them are longer than others, but at the bottom of the narrative, it also identifies the primary challenges with regard to that trail segment. So if we go to the next slide, there is our drawing sheet. I think I told you for each drawing, we have 2 sets of trails, top and bottom, but for this drawing, we showed it at a much larger scale and just showed 1 section of trail because we wanted to be able to show the tunnel crossing in more detail. So if you're looking at the top left of the sheet, you would imagine yourself following that trail, which is bordered by those 2 heavy gray lines, and that would descend downhill in the form of a ramp till it reached tunnel elevation. You would make a right turn towards the road, pass underneath the tunnel. This tunnel is dimensioned to meet the same dimensions as the tunnel at Bayfront Park. Once you were underneath and cross the road, you would make a right turn, and then likewise progress uphill up a series of accessible ramps until you were back to sidewalk grade. Now, there are a couple of other things happening in this slide that aren't maybe immediately apparent, but that really drive the cost and the complexity of this project, and particularly the tunnel. So really quickly, there are a number of utilities that pass through the site and through where the tunnel is. In other words, underneath the roadway, the most significant of which is an 18-inch water main. So we have to move that water main, but we know we have to move it outside the influence of the tunnel and the roadway. Well, we don't have a lot of space left between the walk where it meets the tunnel and the property lines. We have to maintain a certain separation between water and other utilities such as sanitary. So I'm telling you all of this because that takes our water main out onto private property, on consumers' energy property to avoid that sanitary sewer, which is the dashed purple line that you see towards the top of the slide. So I'm talking about the significance of replacing that water line, and that certainly is the most significant utility here, but there are also gas utilities, stormwater utilities, and communication, so telephone, fiber optic. One of those fiber optic lines is a duct bank, so it's not just a wire or a wire and a conduit, it's a set of conduits encased in a concrete casing. So it's not an inexpensive operation to replace or remove that. if we can go to the next slide, please. So this is a cross section of that tunnel. If you can go back to the last slide, just really quickly, we're basically standing below road grade to the right of that tunnel and then taking a look at it from ground elevation. So let's go back to that tunnel slide now. So the gray area is the tunnel itself and the ceiling. The slopes on either side represent the road shoulder, and then in the foreground versus showing where that cross section would cut the ramp on either side where it enters the tunnel. So you can see the tunnel has a fairly significant length. If you look at the cyclist within the tunnel and the circle right behind the cyclists, that is where that water main passes through currently. So each drawing has at least one, and in many cases more than one, representative cross section that that describes maybe more easily and more visually what the challenges are, whether it's this circumstance or a steep swale that we have to fill to place the trail, or maybe utilities that we have to move to place the trail. We had to cut sections like this to tell us what was going on and how to respond properly. So as I said, each drawing should have a set of representative sections going along with it. So just a summary of design and engineering challenges we encountered, most of which we anticipated, mainly the tunnel crossing, the proposed retaining walls and clearance to roadway. We need to maintain 30 feet of clear zone. We have that in most places. There are one or two changes that we can make to make that happen everywhere. So that's not a big concern. We know we can get 3 feet 5-inch minimum depth of cover from the tunnel ceiling to the finished roadway grade. We've achieved that. We've protected that existing 72-inch storm sewer, which crosses the road just west of the tunnel location from any impact. And we've proposed rerouting utilities over and under the tunnel and ramp structures. So in that graphic there shows you the location of the entire proposed trail and where that tunnel crossing is proposed itself, just east of Parkview. I believe that's Parkview Ave. Next slide, please. So with regard to existing utilities, most of the challenge is created at that location where you have to place the tunnel. But there is also a significant drainage swale east of the tunnel crossing in front of what I'll call the hotel district. So most of you familiar with that drive, notice coming in from the west, how pronounced that swale is. We had two options there. One was to place the trail on an embankment, hold it up with a retaining wall. The other option was to cut into the slope and place the trail, both to try to get a level surface. But the former would come with significant cost with regard to the retaining wall. The latter would come with significant costs regarding replacing the utilities that we would encounter. So a third choice was made to fill that drainage swale, to place the stormwater that occupies it underground, and to create a more level surface for that trail and to make that really pronounced swale go away. And this was a decision that that MDOT was in agreement with, so fully supported by MDOT. But what that does mean is that the cost to not only fill that swale, but to place storm sewer within it so that we are carrying the stormwater and not leaving it in what would be a flat situation, but conducting it to where it needs to go. So stormwater system redesign and the pipe and structures that go into converting that swale to a storm sewer assembly carried significant costs. Yeah, so just to kind of detail this a little bit more, we can't just place pipe any size. We have to make sure that it's going to accommodate, meet, or exceed what that swale is carrying right now, which means we have to determine what drains into it, which I think if we go to the next slide, can give you a pretty good idea of the drainage area that contributes to that section of roadway. So we're going way back beyond Sheridan Road in some cases, not so far on Resort Pike, but that's actually the area that contributes to stormwater runoff, whether it's via surface or underground, to that road shoulder. So that gives you an idea as to why that swale is so deep and pronounced right now. Another design and engineering challenge were physical obstacles. The biggest one is probably the instance I mentioned regarding the tunnel and the presence of utilities within the roadway that pushes us to install that reroute of the water main outside of the right of way, which necessitates an easement. And we know those easements will probably come at a significant cost. Other physical obstacles can be relocated within the right of way, but still come at cost. So we're talking about fire hydrants, light poles, electrical cabinets. There are 2 business signs that are within the road right of way that we would also have to remove and reconstruct. Okay, so this one is a really big challenge, our driveway and roadway crossings. So most of you know that the roadways that beat US 31 coming from the south come down a pretty significant slope. And in a lot of instances, that slope carries right down to US 31 itself. Well, when we create a roadway crossing, we really have to try to adhere to the Disabilities Act, which asks us to maintain a 2% cross slope or less. In most cases, the crosswalk we encountered was 3 to 10%. Now, talking to MDOT, there are some instances where they acknowledge we just can't adhere to ADA everywhere because we have physical challenges that are insurmountable, like topography. But there are some things we can do to relax these slopes, but they involve removing a larger section of driveway, flattening out where the trail portion crosses, and then steepening the other section. So you create sort of maybe a minor speed hump there when you do so. So, yeah, so it would have to be one of the 2, either MDOT would have to sign off on allowing that crossing because it would occur within their road right of way, or we would want to pick up some additional driveway and flatten that crossing out.
How many of those are there?
I believe there are 7 total. 2 of them are road crossings and the other 5 are business driveways. Now, there are a couple that fall within 2%, so we would have to make no modifications at those driveways.
But there are 7 that would be.
But there are 7 that would be, yes, yes, sir. So next slide, please. At the second to last section of the study is our preliminary opinion of construction costs. So this identifies all preliminary costs associated with everything to build and complete the project, including the final design, engineering, bidding, construction, and project completion. We completed the estimate using quantities measured from the AutoCAD survey and drawing. So what we have is sort of well, I'll call it what it is, schematic design. So it's sort of a final design light, but it's scalable. It was completed on an AutoCAD survey, so it's a really convenient use to measure quantities from that. And then we used unit costs applied from most recent bid information, and that's pretty important, including recent bid results. We got some really valuable input from City of Petoskey DPW. And some information regarding MDOT bid costs. Also included in the costs are contractor general conditions, design and engineering fees, geotechnical investigation, which will inform things like the final pavement section, and establish other field standards for construction, construction contingency, partial topographic survey. So we know we have survey from East Park all the way to Emmett Street. And then we included a factor for market conditions in the estimate, since costs right now are particularly volatile. So the easement costs are not included in the estimate. And that's because we really can't determine those right now before we sit down with property owners and have that conversation. I believe Kendall, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the city is bound to pay market value for property easements. So
Are you asking?
I'm asking you to confirm that, but I think that's,
Generally speaking, if the city is buying property.
it's got to make market value, yeah. So, so I can show you the estimate now, if we go to the next slide. So our subtotal for the entire trail is about 6.5 million. There's another number at the bottom there. It's identified as alternate East Park connector. This is an optional trail route that would shorten the trail such that it would begin just east of East Park and connect. I don't know how many of you know the Wheelway that well, but there's a bridge within East Park that you cross, and we would connect just east of that bridge crossing.
Could you go back to the map and show
Yes.
people? That would probably be helpful.
Oh, you had it right there.
Was it right there? Where-
This one.
Which, was it earlier?
Yeah.
It was, no, a little bit more, yeah, right there. Yep. Thank you. So,
Oh,
It's okay.
you got it.
It's good.
So this is the East Park connector. Well, that would cost about 600,000 and change to build, but it would save us about 200,000 because this segment costs about 800,000 to build. The trail would start here east of East. So if we can go back to that that estimate summary. So those sheet numbers, sheet 1 through 8, pertain to the actual drawing sheets in the study. So you can look at the study, actually look at a glance here and see sheet 2 is particularly expensive. That's our tunnel crossing. But if you look at the study drawing itself, you can also pick out things that contribute to the cost, which are also covered in that written summary on the first page.
Are you sending these to council? Because I have not seen any of this until now.
No, I'll send the study itself. Tonight we just wanted to summarize the study and what went into it and what you could find, but we'll send a full copy to Kendall. So you guys have it all
Okay.
to review. So if we go to the next slide, please. Lastly, we wanted to offer a conclusion in our study. Again, our charge was to determine the feasibility of a trail route to reconnect the Wheelway at a more near-term manner. And so this is what we found. These are some elements that NDOT recommended. They're all fairly easy to achieve. And I can review them if you like, but I'd really like to skip ahead to the next page. So these are the conclusions that our office has to offer from the study. I guess first, the south segment is conceptually feasible from a design and engineering standpoint. The south segment may be the best near-term possibility to bypass the collapsed segment of Wheelway, and the south segment may also realize additional non-motorized transportation benefits in the process. So I'm talking about those connections on the south side of 31 and also modification of the existing sidewalk to convert it from a 6-foot wide sidewalk to a 10-foot wide non-motorized trail. Next slide, please. Lastly, most non-motorized trails represent a combination of transportation and recreational facilities. One or the other prioritized depending on the location, route, and intended user. I think we probably all have our own opinions, but would probably agree on the prioritization of the Wheelway, but there's a significant prioritization of recreation with regard to the Wheelway. You get some spectacular views. It takes you by some really neat locations. If it were prioritizing transportation, it probably would be up on the roadway, paralleling the roadway itself. The south segment would reprioritize that section for transportation. The south segment presents compromises with regard to trail design guidelines. We know that. We know that we will be asking for relief from at least some of the requirements regarding cross slopes at some driveways. And then we know that the south segment will probably fall short of offering the recreational benefits and exposure to the region's natural assets the Miracle Mile presents. So as we conclude this, Kendall had mentioned a separate study had been commissioned to identify preliminary design, engineering, and construction costs to replace the trail down below in its original location. And so we would just recommend comparing those costs, the feasibility of that installation, and the quality of the two options, and what is desired and what priorities are desired, whether it's transportation or recreation, before selecting an option. So that's the presentation I had for tonight. Again, just intended to summarize the study, but can I answer any questions?
We'll go to council first. So council, do you have any questions? Ms. Demore?
Hello, thank you for that. I heard you say something, I think, so let me clarify that first. When you were talking, you said something about bluff stability that MDOT may or may not share that perspective. Was that okay? Can you kind of explain to me what you meant by that?
Sure. So we tried to base a lot of our design decisions on what MDOT is doing with regard to the roadway, because theoretically they have to contend with the bluff also. Theoretically, it's presenting a threat to them. When we broached the possibility of placing the trail on the north side of the roadway, we received a lot more pushback from MDOT regarding things like we can't guarantee that it's going to last in that location. But when we asked them if they were really concerned, if they were studying the bluff and preparing to address a situation should it arise, the only information we got back was that there is a monitor at the Epler curve right across the street from that intersection that monitors the movement of that bluff. But there's nothing other than that in place. So I guess it's an open question as to whether we should be looking further west along the trail. But if you walk the trail itself, it's pretty obvious that there's some movement much further west than where that failure took place. So I don't want to speak for MDOT. They've been a great ally on this project, but I think they're trying to kind of couch their response and coax us towards a south side trail position, but falling short of saying, if you place it on the south side, we can guarantee it'll stay there.
Thank you.
I know that probably didn't give you a real short, quick answer. I apologize.
It's okay.
Mr. Shields?
Thank you, Tim. This is microphone is on. Thank you, Tim. This is great information to have this discussion, have this background information, and knowing those hurdles, it allows for a good discussion to have. This question, the profile of the road, it showed the car in the lane, and then the paved shoulder, and then the 10-foot. If bollards were in place, could that 10-foot minimum be reduced? Was that any part of the discussion?
Yeah, we tried to push that option, and we were able to accomplish it on the Epler curve. So you probably noticed the bollards that are at the guardrail there. That was the only location where they would relent. And so we talked about anything from bollards to something more solid, like a Jersey barrier, like a concrete barrier placed right on the roadway to separate drivers from cyclists in a physical manner. And the response we got was, those can't be placed that close to the roadway because they create a risk for the driver. So I would say yes, we did. We were a little disappointed that we couldn't get there, but.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Moore?
This question may be more for Kendall. I'm not sure, so whomever. But Kendall, earlier you referenced that earlier Baird study, and you said it was more of a slope failure study. So my question is, has a targeted study of options and costs been done nearer the old location akin to what's been done here in this new location?
Not to the detail that this study provided.
Okay.
The Baird study did come with some concepts, but there would need to be a lot more study from a drainage standpoint, from a stormwater standpoint. And that was also before we lost a significant amount closer to Arrowhead Shores. So there are some progress, there has been some progress made towards the replacement, if you will. But there would need to be a lot more details involved with anything more than that.
Okay, thank you so much.
Ms. Walker.
Thank you. Thank you, Tim, for the presentation. Could you go back to the stormwater swale area? Thank you. Would you please go back to the stormwater swale area, that slide that you had that showed that swale between Epler Road and Resort Pike Road? Yes, that's it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Nope.
No problem. So, and you said that you've also done some partial topographic surveys. And so my concern since day one, since the trail fell into Lake Michigan, was that the Epler Road swale, the movement of water from Epler Road to the south, coming down Epler Road and crossing into the bay is exactly where the compromised area happened. And Emmett County and Resort Township in the city of Petoskey, in their improvements at Greenwood Cemetery, completely deforested that western section of the property at Epler Road. So who is to say at any juncture that the falling in of the bike path into Lake Michigan isn't a result of the flow of water happening with such great force from Epler Road and potentially from what was an area where the roots were retaining the soil and retaining the water and managing the water. And when you deforest something and you plant grass seed and sand or topsoil, you're losing the ability to contain and manage that water. So I am still of the theory, whatever it's worth, that had something to do with the compromise of that bike path. And there's a historical documented incidents of water and shoreline falling out exactly where Epler Road goes to the lake. So what I'm trying to get at is, I know you've done the topographic studies and you've done such extensive studies about that. Maybe I'm just holding on to something that's not viable, but I really would like that issue to be addressed, or at least was that a thought or a consideration? And if you have any further. Thanks.
Yeah, it's hard to disagree with anything you said when you visit that location and you see how close the failure is to Epler, and you know, the appearance that some clearing was done to install storm sewer at that curve from the road downward. But there are also some other natural conditions going on. There's an indication of a perched water table. So that whole slope is almost all cedar, and cedar will only grow when their feet are wet. So we know we have water coming out of the ground all along the length of that trail. But I can't say with certainty that Epler and the drainage off of Epler isn't contributing to that situation. And I think that's the general vicinity of where that monitor was placed, where MDOT placed the monitor as well. So
I mean, if
to
that's
me, that
your
would
catch
indicate some
basin,
concern.
if that's your catch basin, and Resort Pike and Epler are steep slopes headed right for the
Sure.
lake. And
Yeah.
so it just seems like the flow of water, it's gonna go the path of least resistance, and it's headed right into, I mean, you showed me the swale right there. It's like, okay, the stormwater contribution area that,
Right.
my theory makes sense, but whatever it's worth. I mean, I'm not attached to that, but I'm attached to it because.
If you were gonna make it an assessment purely on visibility and what you see, it'd be hard to argue against that because everything. you
So then
see-
it becomes the question of like, who's responsible for that?
So this kind of gets back to the comment I made about MDOT may or may not, because we talked about this location and, you know, we said, so you're not worried about that falling into the lake? And no, we're, you know, well, we're not studying it. We're studying at that location. Okay. So then we said, okay, well, if we put a trail there, are you confident that the trail will stay in place? And again, we didn't get an affirmative.
But they're doing some kind of monitoring.
But they're monitoring at one location, which is about the location that you're describing. But as Kendall said, it's apparent that it's not just that location where the trail itself is starting to fail. Not suggesting that necessarily there's anything above that that's starting to fail, but from the trail below, we're seeing that start to move downward into the lake.
As you go west.
Yes.
As you go west past even Arrowhead Shores, there is a sloughing off of the bank, which is not even attached to the falling place locations now.
Exactly, yeah.
I've been down there looking for where those fissions are. There are fissions there.
It's, I mean, I apologize for not bringing more photos because it's really an eye opener. And if you can have the chance to see it from the water, it's even more eye opening, I guess.
Mr. Shields.
If I can bring the discussion back to the south side for the moment. You're looking at the non-motorized 10-foot trail on the south side, which I understand why. Is there any discussion in your group sessions about sidewalk length or width trail or something similar to, I know that on the north side, once that picks up with on 31 there, it's just a sidewalk.
Yes,
And so, you know, that maybe not be ideal, but it could allow for something more immediate and faster and at a lower cost. Was that discussed or what the possibility of that?
we didn't evaluate sidewalk costs, but we could make that projection. If you like, yeah. That'd be good,
Well,
too.
I guess the follow-up is there, what would be, where does this go next?
This is going to be presented to the Emmett County Board of Commissioners, I think, next Monday. It's also being presented to Resort Township, because we all jointly were part of the process. So I think once all three boards have an opportunity to look at this, then maybe we can discuss it jointly or individually. Maybe each board might come up with their own ideas. So I think we can also get the full drawings if you're interested in looking in more detail. I mean, this is just kind of an introduction to all this tonight, because there's a lot of information in there. If you actually do want to dissect all the stuff that's in there. It still basically comes down to here's where the route would be, here's all the problems we have. And you're basically looking at about $7 million. So before you get into easements, et cetera. So, and then do you pursue further on that as a group if you want to pursue that, or you pursue perhaps the other option, which might be a little more expensive, but not relatively that much more expensive perhaps. And there might be funding available for that. That's also a very large project to get involved with. There's a whole lot of other players involved and more money with that. I mean, no matter what the project,
Talking about
along the water.
putting it back where it was.
Right. Well, not where it was, because you're not gonna be on the bluff, you're gonna be on the water.
You'll be somewhat down by the shore.
Yeah.
Sorry, Sarah.
So I mean, that's kind of, so tonight is just kind of a brief discussion where, wait for all the boards to give a chance to look at it, get everybody's opinion as far as where they'd like to go with it next. And as far as this board, would you want to have a joint session perhaps following it, but maybe you want to wait until you have a chance to look at the more detail, et cetera.
Question. Do you have any ideas of easement cost? What is easement cost? What do you mean? Are we buying whole pieces of property or are we buying a few feet?
Just a few feet to pass the trail.
Okay.
Two of the larger easements would.
I don't want to make any assumptions. Two of the larger easements may be more easily to acquire. One of them would be Consumers Energy and the other would be towards this end of the trail, which would be McLaren Hospital.
Okay. Are there any of these factors that are obstacles that you listed? Are any of these obstacles also, if the trail were to be put back down along the shore, would we be addressing any of these obstacles of crossing roadways or utility? None of that.
That's our biggest challenge and our biggest
The
cost.
biggest
is the
challenge
crossings
is
of the Everglades.
is the tunnel and the utilities. Okay, that's what I thought. Have you talked or did you look at this option, keeping it on the north side and cantilevering where it narrows down, where you end up having these bowlings out? Is that a possibility to cantilever that one piece right there?
We did, and that was around that Epler curve. So if you're looking at that image right now where Epler, the north-south meets the Red Highway, and the mayor is right, you would have to cantilever the walk because that slope begins maybe 3 feet after the guardrail.
Right.
So we put a preliminary cost on that, and that cost in turn drove us to move the trail, to make the decision to move it to the south.
What was the cost for that?
I don't have it in front of me, but the cost for, I'm sorry. Yeah, the cost for that cantilever approached the cost of the tunnel itself. There was a significant length, not the trail associated with the tunnel, but the construction to build the tunnel. But the other thing that concerned us about that cantilever was the condition of the slope below.
But you understand that the state is going to have to step in and do something because the roadway is otherwise going to be affected. Is that correct?
Well, that's,
I mean, what are they going to do? Tell everybody we're closing this road down and now you have to go down to Walloon Lake and across? They're not going to do that.
no,
So-
but they haven't committed to, they've stopped short of acknowledging that there's a condition here at that location that they know they have to fix. They're kind of in discovery mode where they're trying to identify if it is a problem that they have to fix, or if it's a problem they can manage, I guess.
Well, they have a lot of sweet talk. But you know as well as I do that they are not going to walk away from a massive repairs at some point if the water comes up again. It won't be in just that curve spot, but also down across from the Cormax in that area as well. Okay,
At least one of the parties participating in the study said if we select the north route, we don't want to participate in the study any further. We feel that strongly about locating on the south side of the road.
One of the three partners, you said?
Yes.
I kind of have the same feeling at this point. I'm very much concerned about the roads that we're crossing. I see how fast cars go on the highway and turn up Resort Pike. I see how fast they come down Resort Pike. That road alone, to me, it has many issues because of the width of the road. As it fans out there more or less.
Somebody's been killed.
And the elevation is
And the steepness as it meets.
20%, 10%,
Yeah.
right? Almost 8.
Yeah.
So with that, I'm not thrilled about this plan. Because I don't feel it's gonna address, if we're talking safety, I don't believe it's gonna address safety any more than the people riding on the highway. Mr. Moore.
Speaking of safety, will those, whatever those temporary barriers were, sorry, this is not my wheelhouse. Will those be up again on the north side for protection of people who traverse that area in the absence of the?
You're talking on the curves? Yes, so we have been approved for installation of those by the state. And we are waiting for them to complete their repainting of, they were in town actually last week, painting the yellow stripes. So we expect the all clear as soon as they get done.
Thank you, Kendall.
I believe we need to push the state to make some commitments on what they're going to do if and when there's more slope failure, because it isn't a matter if, it's just a matter of when. And I believe they should step up to the plate on this and be an active partner in it. I believe city council should send a letter. Mr. Wagner.
Yeah, Mayor, a couple of things. I'm like, I think many of you know, I'm a member of the Trails Council and a big fan of biking, and you know, everybody would like to see that shoreline, the bluff repaired. And it feels to me that the bigger issue is that bluff failure in that shoreline, which sounds like is more of a state issue. But somebody's got to fix it and address it. And even the water wash, that was part of the Baird study. They identified that as a piece of the causes. And so I think, you know, it's not in this, but I feel like somehow, whether it's a letter from us or pressure from our representatives or the four organizations who funded this study, that to me, that's the big priority. Like, you fix it, and then maybe there's a chance to put a bike trail back on it. But if that's not fixed, it's bigger issues in the future. And question I have is on, I don't know, Al or Kendall or whoever, I don't know where the property lines are, but the four entities involved in this, what is that complexity of whose problem is it? You know, there's kind of no lead. I bet if anybody has perspective on that complexity, it'd be interesting to hear.
Al, you know who owns property there. I mean, you were.
I mean, with the city, I mean, there was a lot of just easements that were taken, that were received, and the city basically, you know, got easements, like even through the county's portion. It's for all the different entities and the different private property owners, and then built the project. So I'm not sure you can say it's anybody's responsibility or not. It's just who wants to take it on. You know, if any one of them says, yeah, go ahead and build it, we're just not going to participate, which we're welcome to go across our township, and that's fine, but there's really not a responsibility there as far as bringing the bike trail. So I don't, yeah, I guess it's kind of up in the air, who wants to take it on and do it. And obviously funding is the big ticket item, and you know, with the state needing to do something with the highway, as we all kind of see needing to be done. And there might be opportunities there if something did happen, either up above or down below, that there would be participation probably from different sources at the state level.
Pray for rain. Anyone else wish to speak? Miss Walker.
Yeah, one other item. I did see that the sidewalk you were talking about on the south side, starting at Parkview, I would think that would be in Resort Township's interest to have a more walkable area for the residents. Because you think about Parkview and like how many residents live up in that area and how really inaccessible and unwalkable, other than the bike path itself, the existent one, would connect you to town and places to go buy your food or shop. It's a very car focused township. And so I would hope that they would be excited about the prospects of being able to add some walkability to their community and investing in that. And I wish you the best of luck meeting with Emmett County and Resort Township.
All right. You guys have done? No, no. I'm gonna open this up. Normally we don't if there's not a motion on something, on discussion for a vote. But I'm willing to open this up to public for you to give feedback to the council, not to the audience, but feedback to the city council members up here. If you do, you would step up to the mic, you'd give your full name, full address, and involvement if you wish, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. My name is Brent Poland, 208 Fairview Avenue in Fort Wayne, in the city. I'm the executive director of the Top Michigan Trails Council. We were one of the funding partners of this study, and just really appreciate the partnership from the city and really the city's leadership in, the city's really quarterbacked this process for the last 2 years, and that has been appreciated to give some direction to this. So, I would just say that the Trails Council has always believed that we should rebuild the original trail, period. Now, we have agreed over the last 2 years to participate in these conversations about a temporary alternate route because of the immediate safety concerns that were presented. And I'm also a walkability guy, so I, like you, was hoping Resort Township would be more interested than I think they are in that aspect of it. And where I live out sort of off the Greenway, and I thought, wouldn't it be great to have a similar thing on the other side of town? I think I'll take credit for calling it the West Side Connector too. I think that was my idea. But we were looking for a cheap and fast solution to this problem up on 31, and this trail is neither. It's been 2 years. We're no closer to building it. We know what it's going to cost now, and it's definitely not cheap. It's very much in the ballpark of what we think it might cost to redo the real trail down on the bluff. So, when we originally approached this, we thought maybe this was $1.5 million trail. And then that was worthy money to spend because it would create this additional connectivity in the community. And then you could come back when lake levels went down, which they have over the last 2 years, and revisit the issue of rebuilding the original trail. Now we see that the cost of this is as much or more than it would be to do the trail back down where it was. I've seen estimates that are more in the $5 to $6 million range for what it would cost to repair down there. I mean, Mayor Murphy nailed part of it, and that all of these concerns about utilities, easements, all of that stuff's been sorted out already down on the bluff. And I would say that for this study, Beckman Rader was specifically asked, what would it cost to do this trail? And that's the question that they answered. For the Barry engineering study, the question they were asked was, what caused the slope failure? And that's the question they answered. The question they were not asked was, how should we rebuild this trail? So I think that the options that they gave as possibilities for addressing the trail in its original location, it looked expensive when you looked at what they estimated, but it wasn't part of a coherent plan to do it. They said, well, you got to do X, Y, and Z. Some combination of these 10 things will get you to the slope stability that you need. So I think that, we kicked the tires on this, and I think we found out it's expensive. I do think we need a little bit more information about rebuilding the trail in a similar location. I think that one thing to consider is that we don't have to rebuild what was there before. It doesn't have to be rebuilt as a railroad race. It's not a railroad anymore. The trail can be lowered. There can be a switchback to follow the new topography. Drive up on 119, you see that switches back around these kinds of things. So there's, I think, sustainable, simpler engineering solutions to rebuilding the trail down there. And I think that, in the long run, I think that that's what people want. No one comes into the trail center and says, when are you going to build the West Side Connector, right? They come in and say, when is the Miracle Mile going to come back? Photographs of that section of trail are in tourism publications statewide around the region. It's really well known. It's become an iconic part of the Petoskey experience. And there is several sections of trail in this area that have problems, but most of the section that's closed could reopen right now. With lake levels going back down, I think that solving this problem where the trail originally belonged is very feasible. And the other thing that I just want to share is that, so we did a trail user survey in 2014. We did it again in 2021. And I will tell you that our data for that showed 116,000 uses of the Little Travelers Railway in 2021. That's with the broken connection. And it generated $1.4 million in direct spending. So that means while they were on the trail, they stopped at Gilman's and got ice cream. So that doesn't account for where they slept the night before, what they had for breakfast. So, you know, the total economic impact to the community is greater than that, $1.4 million. You know, about 25% of the people are paying for camping, hotel, another 25% second home. And when you look at who the users are, it's pretty evenly split between locals and non-locals. So, you know, Emmett, Charlevoix residents versus the rest of the state, rest of the country. So it's a tourism draw, but it's heavily used locally too. So it's not something that's just for kind of one group or the other, it's for, you know, the whole community. And in terms of the cost, we do need more information about the cost, but whatever the cost is, let's say $6 million, because the math is easy. It's not going to be $2 million for the city, $2 million for the township, $2 million for the county. That's not how these projects work. Typically, the local government match is often around 20%. So the actual total, and then that would be divided by 3, maybe, or 4, depending. So, you know, just don't get too wrapped up in what those numbers mean, because that's part of what we're here for, is to figure out, okay, we take this little bit of local money, and you go to the state and get matching funds, and take the state money, go to the feds and get some more matching funds. And sort of that's how these projects get put together. Everyone's a little bit different. I think for this trail, we could probably get some significant private investment, which does not typically happen, but I think we probably could look for that as part of the mix. So I guess what I'm saying is I think this is really solvable. And I just want to kind of keep our eyes on the prize that one way or another, we need to solve this problem, whether we like the answer we got from this study or not. Trail's broken, it needs to be fixed, you know, one way or another. So we just want to, you know, keep this moving forward. And, you know, we're here to help with that. And the last thing I'd sort of say about the MDOT monitor is I think that, to me, the interesting thing about that is MDOT is not so concerned about what their data is, that they're actively planning to do anything to fix 31, right? In some ways, that'd be the best thing ever. If MDOT needed to come in there and spend money, then we need business, things would start happening. So whatever their data is, they're not worried that there's imminent danger to 31, which to me means that there's more stability in the slope maybe than we think there is. Certainly they're not concerned about it. So it sort of gives kind of 2 different kinds of information from how MDOT sort of reacting to that, right? And I would say that, you know, whatever it will cost to do the work down on the bluff, it's not $6 million for the trail. It's probably like $5 million to stabilize the bluff and $1 million to pave the trail. And I think stabilizing the bluff is going to happen one way or another because of homes and businesses and 31. So I just, you know, for the last 2 years, really big, scary numbers have been getting thrown around about how much this project's going to cost. And I just don't think that that's very reflective of the reality or what's going to come out of like the local government's pocket. So, you know, I think that this has been a good partnership the last 2 years to keep this moving forward. And, you know, I hope we can keep moving forward from here. And the Trails Council and myself will continue to be a resource. Anything you need, you know, step up for new studies or whatever it is.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else wish to speak to council at this time? Full name, full address.
Evan Meyer, 130 Stewart Avenue. I guess I'm a rebuild the bluff trail guy. And it's confirmed. Meeting. So I'm a local biker. It's a one-of-a-kind section of trail. You know, we call it world class around my house. And, you know, $6 million, 10 million, that's a special place. And that's my opinion.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak to council at this time, please?
My name is Beth Cotty. I live at 1111 East Mitchell Street here in Petoskey. And I was actually a part in that survey that this gentleman was speaking about. And one of the questions was, would you be willing to pay a permit fee to use the trail? And I was like, absolutely, absolutely. I would love to. You know, if you think about when the state parks created their passport, it was a little, you know, you spent $11, I think, in the beginning to get that little P on your tag. That has now generated a huge surplus in grant money for the state of Michigan. I don't have numbers on me, I just know when it was created back in, I think, 2010, it has just grown exponentially further than I ever expected it to. That may be a very good source of funding for this. The other thing that I wanted to point out is that the numbers that weren't included in that study, which was a beautiful study, by the way, was what are you going to do with the existing pieces of the trail? That, I don't know if any of you have walked down there recently, but there is a well-worn path around the barriers that you've put up, the chain link fence. There's an increased amount of graffiti inside that barred off area. There's obvious activity that's been going on, and the liability of someone getting hurt in there. I mean, I run that trail, and there used to be, right at the end of that Magnus Park, there was a, like a barrier that said, hey, this trail's closed. Well, that is gone. It's actually moved up on the hill. And it doesn't say anything to anybody anymore. It's like, if I was just nobody, just some stranger walking down, I wouldn't realize that was talking about this trail that I'm walking on. That was about a month ago, but so I don't know if anything's changed in the meantime, but I am concerned about people going back there, and what are we gonna do with that trail if we don't rebuild it? It can't just stay in the state that it's in, so.
If we start charging for our trail, and it's $50,000 for what, a mile to repave it, roughly, Kendall? It's more, 50,000 for a half mile, quarter, something like that. We've okayed it.
$100,000 last year to resurface the trail, close by West Park.
Yeah.
I believe we got 1,700 some.
So under a mile for 100,000. So what happens when all of the people all the way up to Mackinac City and to Charlevoix, they decide they need to do what we have to do, and that we made a commitment we would repair and keep it, that they start charging a tax on that as well. You know what I mean? So now it's going to be a $23 ride from Charlevoix to Harbor Springs and back, for passes and stuff. I just don't see a collection ability to do that. I think it sets a bad precedence of everybody's going to start charging people to use their bike, what is a public bikeway.
Oh, sure.
Okay.
But I mean, if we had like a pass that just said, hey, I'm a supporter of this, even if there's a donation.
You could do that for I'm sure you could donate, but to require somebody to have it, and who's going to monitor it,
Well, people go to the state parks all the time,
They don't when somebody's at the gate.
Yeah, exactly.
Anybody else wish to speak to council at this time? You what?
One thing I read.
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
Thanks. I forgot to mention about the question about the ownership. So it is complicated. The city of Petoskey holds the easement for this trail. You agreed when the trail was put in to maintain it. An issue we're seeing now in lots of our trails is that people think maintenance means mowing and like clearing tree branches. They don't necessarily think it means, resurfacing, which Petoskey does. Thank you, Kendall. But then when you get to this point where it's really big thing like construction, then maintenance gets a little squishier. And part of what's really complicated about this, of course, this is in Resort Township. The city has the easement, and a big chunk of this property was purchased by the county with a huge grant from the DNR trust fund. And when you take trust fund money for a project, you commit to keeping that property open for recreation in perpetuity. And the fact that there has been no public access to this for the past 2 years, to me indicates that the county is flirting with being in trouble if DNR wanted to pursue it. So, I think that they should keep that in mind when they hear this study, that they need to think about, what their total obligation is. But
I hope you remind them of that. Is there anybody else wish to speak to council at this time? Thank you very much for your presentation. We'll be back with you, and good luck on the next 2 stops.
Thank you.
Especially one of
Thanks
them,
for listening.
especially one of them. Okay, moving on. Next, it's the consent agenda. It's an adoption of a proposed resolution that would confirm approval of the following. The May 16th, 2022 regular session meeting minutes, as well as the May 17th, 2022 special session with the Downtown Management Board. As well as acknowledge the receipt of a report concerning certain administrative transactions that have occurred since May 16th, 2022. I take it to council for possible approval or questions or adoptions of anything. Mr. Wagner?
I'll motion to approve the consent agenda.
Okay,
Support.
I have a motion from Mr. Wagner and a support from Mr. Moore. Council, any other questions or changes or anything you wish? Ms. Lindsay?
Thank you, Mayor. I do have a question about the check register on page 8.
Wait, just give us a sec.
Okay.
Okay, page 8.
Yeah, so 2 line items, Northern A1 Environmental Services for 11,520, and then the OHM Advisors for 18,540. I'm assuming the OHM is probably as consultants for the Lake Street redesign.
No,
So
OH,
that's for the library.
it's a library.
Okay. Because they're doing design work for a library renovation or,
I would have to check in with the library was doing it, because I don't recall it now.
okay. So it's some kind of
Yeah, it's
consultation.
yeah.
And then
contracted
Northern
consultant.
A1 Environmental Services is usually pumping out like
Correct, cash
wastewater.
basins, cleanings and, or sewer, if we have a sewer issue.
So this was,
Sewer backup.
it's underlined as distribution system, so that would just be like infrastructure. stuff.
Correct.
Got it,
yes.
thank you.
You'll see them at pretty much every corner at
Oh, I
some
know who
point.
they are.
She knows who we are.
Okay. It's pretty exciting stuff.
Thank you.
Any other discussion, council? I take it to Ms. Plask for roll.
Wagner.
Yes.
Demore.
Aye.
Shields.
Yes.
Walker.
Yes,
Murphy.
Yes, motion passes to accept the consent agenda 5-0. Next, we're moving along to miscellaneous public comments. That is your opportunity as people in the community to address city council with a concern, an issue, a comment that you wish to have. When you step up, please give us your full name and your full address. If there is an issue you're going to wish to discuss that is on the agenda, please, if you could save that comments until we get to that issue. But if you have to leave, then we'll take it now. Is there anybody that wishes to speak to council? Come on down. Price is right.
Yeah. My name is Beth Cotty, I live at 1111 East Mitchell Street. I was looking through, just our city ordinances and whatnot. Do we have any sort of anything on the books about, a fine or fee schedule for, commercial property owners on our main streets that leave their buildings vacant for a period of time?
There is no way that you can legally assess them other than you would everybody else. The state of California and San Francisco is currently in the court systems, climbing up the ladder, where they have tried to institute a charge for vacant buildings over and above what that would normally be taxed or assessed. That is, there's no reason for us to try anything, because I'm sure unless something has some footing, we're gonna end up being challenged and we aren't gonna, it's gonna cost us a lot. So I just soon wait till San Francisco works through the upper courts of the federal government, and that's what I read in magazines, on city magazines that other people are doing.
Mayor.
Ms. Walker.
Thanks. Beth, I appreciate your question. I know that there's been discussion on social media, especially about a vacancy tax. And what the mayor is referring to is we asked civil counsel or our attorney, like anything, any kind of leverage that we could have on a vacancy tax or disincentivizing vacancies or incentivizing filling of vacancies. And like the mayor said, we feel like we're in a little bit of a legal situation where we really don't feel free to do that. That being said, when the public interview of our new city manager happened, he had several great suggestions of possible ideas and things that have worked out in the communities that he's worked in before. So he'll be joining us on June the 20th, and I look forward to possibly engaging him in those same conversations. So if you could hold on to your question and talk to Shane about that in a public meeting coming up later in this month, I think that might be a great opportunity.
That's future city manager Horn, Mr. Horn. Anyone else wish to speak to council? We have somebody online. Come on down, whoever it is. Oh, yeah.
Good evening. This is Kathy Bickford. I don't know if,
Your address?
pardon me?
We need your full address.
Oh, it's 319 Grove Street. I don't know if the council is aware that I was sent a letter by my neighbor at 319 or 315 Grove Street, Ms. Patullo, regarding the city is willing to buy an air conditioner for my house so I don't have to listen to the noise from the Airbnb next door. I've made copies of this letter. I'll send it. I'm gonna have it scanned.
1 second. You say that the city is buying you an air conditioner?
Well, I'll read the paragraph. I realize that voices do carry, and if it would help, we would be happy to buy you an air conditioning unit for your bedroom window.
Who would be?
She said the city. I have an
The
air
neighbor
conditioner.
said, well, then I guess you would go and have the neighbor write the check because the
Yeah.
city is not going to be supplying air conditioners to any residents.
I don't want an
that
air
I know of.
conditioner. I have an air conditioner. It's called Little Traverse Bay. I put in 10 windows last year in this house, very good windows. I leave my windows open. I like to hear the sound of the nature outside. I like to hear the sound of the city. I'm not going to give that up so the neighbors next door at the Airbnb can have those wonderful things in their life and deny it to me. It's an ongoing problem that doesn't seem to be going away with this Airbnb. The parking is now ramped up again. I had a car sit in front of my house for 3 days and 2 nights. I didn't know who it belonged to till I saw that they went into the house next door. I asked them to move it. They refused. I had a friend over Saturday of last week. She had to park in front of the Patullo's house because the guest was parked in front of my house. I don't understand.
Have you notified the public safety director or the
I
public safety?
have. I
And
called
what
the
did they say
police.
when they came over and saw the car parked in front of your house?
They
that
would
was
not come
your
over.
car?
They would not come over. They said it's just not going to happen. I don't know what's going on. Mayor
We will
Murphy, the
follow
council.
up on that to ensure that the police, public safety follows the regulations that we have set forth in the city, which involves length of time an individual can park, a car can be parked that is not yours in front of your residence.
We've gone through it over and over and over again, and it's just becoming worse. My
Okay.
family can't come and visit me and park in front of my house anymore because there's always someone parked in front of my house. I went and talked to Donna Woodklansky last Sunday. I said, I'm afraid to move my car because someone's going to take the space. She points to the car from the Airbnb that's parked in front of her house. But nobody wants to say anything because everybody's so afraid of the backlash.
Understand that, public streets are publicly owned, publicly plowed by the city and maintained by the city through tax dollars. And people have a right to park on streets. There are times at my house when people across the street have a bridge party all afternoon long and there are cars all the way down in front of my house. I just feel, I'm just happy that people are able to get out and do stuff.
But they leave eventually. You can count on that. They're not spending night after night after night.
I personally, along with Mr. Terry, will talk to Police Chief Breed. Are you good with that, Mr. Terry?
Yeah.
Yeah, we will talk with Officer, Public Safety Director Breed, and somebody will get back with you.
Because I'm becoming to feel very unsafe. I walked into my own backyard last Sunday doing work, back and forth, back and forth. I'm putting in trees. You'll see that when they go in. And they started complaining. And then a woman said to this young man, don't go over there. So my thought was, he's going to come on my property and start threatening me. Because I did catch them walking up from downtown. I was finishing my bike ride. They just happened to be at Howard Street and Grove. And I said, would you please move your car? He said, I don't have to. I said, please, my son's coming up. I guess I will. And
I think that matter would be handled by the police. I would not intervene myself and go out and tell people where they could park or can't park. I think it's public safety that should be used, and I recommend that you call them.
I did.
Officer, City Manager Terry and I will follow up with Public Safety Breed, and one of us three will get back to you, and I will do a follow-up call with you later in the week.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Does anyone else wish to speak?
Hi, guess I'm wondering, first of all.
I need your full name. All right.
Wondering if you want comments about the ordinance changes now or later or next week.
Aren't we doing, I think it's on the agenda, isn't it?
It's on the agenda, so we will have comments for it at that.
Yes, sir. Yeah,
I'll save it to that.
I appreciate that. That will work out better.
Kate Marshall, 1015 East Little. Just picking up on the comment from the lady online. Don't we have an ordinance about short-term rentals? It seems that she's not, the issue isn't where people park, it's that there are short-term rentals. And if they're not licensed.
They are.
That is licensed, and it is a short-term rental. It's one of our 20 that we have in the
That
city.
was my question. Is there a license?
It's one of the
It's in
20
the
that we
central
have in the
business
city.
district. Yeah. Yeah.
Miss Walker.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Kathleen Bickford is in Ward 4, and I've talked to her many times, as well as tried to encourage some kind of mediation between Patullo's as the owners of the Airbnb and Mrs. Bickford. And she has been instructed to call public safety at any juncture. If she doesn't feel safe in her home or she's feeling threatened, that is automatically the go-to is you call public safety and you file your complaint and you're creating a paper trail. And she has definitely done that. And this is an area that's just outside of the parameters of the residential district. And because it's in that zoned area, it is Airbnbs are allowed to happen. It's also one example of what would happen if we allowed 30% of our housing stock to be dictated by the state to be able to be Airbnbs. And so that street's a really good example of what that looks like, because there's at least 3 houses, including previously Stephanie Jackson's home on Grove and Rush Street that was an Airbnb. So there's a really good example of how this could potentially be problematic for us if the state dictates that we have to allow up to 30% Airbnbs in our small communities. So it's a really good example of a snapshot of what that could potentially look like and the ripple effect. So I don't know what's happening with the legislation, but I'm very conscious that is one hyper local example of what 30% Airbnbs in the neighborhood looks like and how that can be impactful, especially to historic residents like Mrs. Bickford and the Clanskys that she referred to on the corner of Petoskey and Grove Street.
The brick house, yes.
Yeah, thank you.
You understand that increasing housing on lots is going to do the same thing as well.
Well, when you have rental homes long-term rentals and homeowners as well. That's a whole different ball of wax, and those are welcomed, I would think, as opposed to these short-term rentals.
But we
where-
have to understand that by doing more housing, we are going to create more
Density.
traffic. More density is gonna create more traffic and more people parking on streets. I mean, that's just a given. You go to any large city that is built up and you'll see that it's, a lot of it is double lane parking trying to get through it. I know from going to Grand Rapids, et cetera.
And to not do anything would be the death of the community, so.
We have to find a good, healthy balance there. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak? There being none, we're gonna go to the city manager's update. And for that, I'm gonna call on city manager Terry. Come on down.
Sure. First item, the city did receive recently the $72,500 waterways grant from the DNR to help with approve for the additional funding for the fuel farm at the marina. That was something new. We had $150,000 cost overrun in that bid, and they are, so it's a 50-50 match with the city and the waterway. So thank you, Kendall, who has left the building, I guess. And then also Lofts of Lumber Square, they have met with the Brownfield Redevelopment Authority. They've gone to their meetings, so they are going forward pursuing the Brownfield TIF request, which eventually sometime will come back to us. I've already had discussions with Mac McCullen regarding that, who's the person that the county uses in preparing all those documents for the city. So we'll be receiving more information from them down the road. Also met with an organization, a company called Crimson LLC. They do large apartment building complexes, Grand Rapids, et cetera. If you Google them, you will see them. They're proposing to provide workforce housing at the Michigan Maple Block site, and they are also going to be meeting at the next meeting of the Brownfield TIF to start a process of requesting a TIF for their site, the Michigan Maple Block. They did not have any plans. It was very new as far as what they were starting to do and just trying to get the options to purchase the property, et cetera, but are also looking to go forward. But I'm sure it will be an option, so if they don't get everything, it's not going to happen. But yeah, but it is kind of encouraging that something will be happening there.
I asked that we could possibly get some presentation on brownfields, because there are new people on this board that have not had that prior training. And I think possibly inviting planning in downtown, so they get an understanding of what brownfield the process. Would that be okay to schedule?
We'll be fine.
I know there is a training coming up countywide. I want to say the 21st, 26th. I'll send it out.
Bear Creek Township?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Of July?
I believe it's June.
June
We
21st.
probably should have
It's
known about
Tuesday.
it sooner.
Didn't know we wanted to go.
Well,
And it's on TIFs and Brownfield redevelopment?
Well, yeah, it's the same thing. There's brownfield TIF just brings in the capture of property taxes from additional taxing units. You can all do a TIF, but then you exclude K-12s, millage rates, et cetera, but that you can do. When you get into a brownfield, you can include those, which brings in a lot more funding.
Right.
So
what is the date again? Is that?
he's gonna look it up and get back to you. He doesn't have the date and time.
Otherwise, if you guys can't make it, then we'll ask for training for you guys. Because I think it's real important, because you're gonna be voting possibly on millions of dollars.
Right. And I'm sure Carla Buckmaster will be happy to give us a presentation on Brownfield redevelopment dollars.
Okay.
Next item moving along is the State Street reconstruction will be beginning next week. The estimated completion date of that will be early August, and that's a mill and fill of the road, but there will be all new curb and gutter put in along with that. And also the Presbyterian Church down on Division and Mitchell will be putting up a new steeple on Thursday, which if they do, will be closing a portion of Division Street so they can put that up there. And then the last item I did have on there also, just a reminder that the public safety open house is next Saturday, June 18th from 11 o'clock a.m. until 2 p.m.
Well worth attending. A lot of community members, there's hot dogs, there's chips and pop. But I think it's really good to, I go every time. I think it's great to be shown there that we support our public safety and their process there. Any other comments, Ms. Walker?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Al, for the update. I had a question about the current zoning for the Michigan Maple Block property. The way it's zoned right now, would housing be allowed there, or is it zoned exclusively industrial, or is it zoned mixed use?
I'll let the city planner answer that
Thank
question.
you.
So currently it's zoned I2, and it's industrial there. To put any kind of sort of heavy residential, it would require a zoning change. So for the project that was proposed, the plan would be for a zoning district change to a PUD there.
PUD, a PUD.
Okay, and then I have another question, Mayor, if I may.
Sure.
So as we move forward, and I think we're gonna be talking about this obviously, so the big picture of zoning ordinance amendments to remove housing barriers, would you think, or could it be discussed in this context to convert all industrial areas I2 zoning in the city of Petoskey to mixed use to facilitate other alternative kinds of mixed use development, turning industrial areas into housing, retail, commercial, kind of like combo mixed use? And I'm not sure if I'm using the right terms, but I'm hoping that maybe that a broad stroke of removing all industrial zoning to mixed use might be able to do something greater. And I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, Zach, or if I could ask that
Well,
question in this
I think you
context.
probably want to have some type of industrial district within your city for those type of activities that might take it. But also depending on what the developer is looking to do, you might make it more difficult to, if you took them to mixed use, because he probably still wants to go PUD.
Okay,
So you can do more options there as far as what the development can be. Because if you took it to a certain type of mixed use or residential, their proposal may not fit for that as well.
okay.
And you still have to go PUD.
And I'm just.
And Zach can answer this question about very, I can't do Zach.
Oh,
That was
If I'm saying
very
it
well
wrong.
put.
Thank you.
That's exactly what it was said, is I think it'd be kind of putting the cart before the horse
Mm,
in doing that. Well, I think it's good to be preemptive. In this case, I think it would probably be better to do it as a project by project, parcel by parcel. Because there are still, while we don't think of them necessarily as industrial uses, but storage buildings, contractor facilities, things like that, that might not benefit from that mixed use.
Okay, that makes sense to me. Thank you. Thanks for answering that.
Ms. Moore.
So I just want to express a concern at this juncture regarding lumber loss. Everybody get it on the radar and find out if I'm correct, but it's my understanding that there is no requirement in the MEDC grant that grant properties be maintained for any given time period as workforce housing. I've been wrong before, but this is my understanding. So if our goal is to have more affordable housing workforce in this instance, if that is accurate, it seems to me that it's going to be very important that if the city contributes funding to this effort, that there be a condition that it be maintained as workforce housing for a designated period of time. And I, for one, hopefully colleagues as well, would like to get clarity on this, since that would be our goal in this undertaking. I stand ready to be wrong if I am, but I think it's going to be real important to get that clarity. And if that indeed is correct, that there is legal reasons that it has to be maintained as workforce housing. So I just want to put that out there.
Right, and discussing that with Mac McClellan too, he said that type of provision would be put in, could be put in to the brownfield redevelopment agreement that you would have with the county when they approve it. There's a document that you complete that has all the specifications for the project, eligible expenses, and any other type of parameters like that could be put into that document.
Thank you.
I mean, there's devil's in detail. There's some work to figure out how that's all going to happen, but yeah, that could happen at that point.
Thank you.
Ms. Walker.
I thank you, Tina, for bringing that up, because there was an MEDC funded project on Wakazoo for what was a rental unit, and now it's been turned into an Airbnb. And that is a prime example of there was no regulation. It only was a certain amount of time that building MEDC funds were given to that building's renovation, and then they held it as rental housing for so long, but then there was a time period it passed, and now it's all an Airbnb unit. And I'm talking about,
It might be 3 at the most, and
it's
sometimes.
like right abuts the alley, right there at the top of the alley at Lakazoo. Yeah,
2 years now.
No, I think it's, they had to hold it for 5 years, I believe, but I think there's 2 units that were doing
so
that.
that's a prime
The city,
example.
the city
that-
did support that.
Yeah.
and, they received $75,000. Because I was involved with that.
Right,
at the
right.
time.
Thank you.
Mayor, if I may,
Sure, please.
in regards to the lots at Lumber Square, I know the Community Foundation was a big helping hand in that, and from my understanding, I think they have some of their own controls involved in restricting it to workforce housing. Well, I think it's a great idea to double down. I'm all about it. I just wanted to make that clear that the Community Foundation came across that as well.
It was 1.25% of the 125% of the county
Median average income.
median
Average
average
income, right.
income.
I have great respect for the community foundation, but when the dollars are coming from the city, then we're fiduciaries of those funds, so.
We would
respectfully.
be discussing that long before, this is a few meetings at least before we ever get to the point of that. And we had that situation where we okayed a brownfield for the Great Lakes Arts Day Harbor. And the city shaved off. We said no, the county came with, we shaved off several millions of dollars as well as changed it to an 80-20 split. Where for the new monies collected, the city would automatically get 20% of that due to the fact that we had to do fire and police protection for that area that was being developed. So we negotiated a better deal than just $5 million. It was a lot less than that, 2.5. Mr. Wagner.
Well, it's not on your items, but I would be very interested in education, going back to the shoreline. And education on kind of the details. I was guilty early on of saying, man, we can get this thing fixed. What if we get the money? What if we could do it with donations? Well, once you overcome the money thing, I know there's a lot more to engineering studies, to whatever else. Like, I thought the Baird study explained everything, and I then learned that the Baird study was just concepts, and there's a whole lot more detail. I think it'd be really helpful to get that perspective from the city at some point. So we're not just seeing, there's Brent, I was gonna say, Brent's awesome vision and getting this thing done. But I think that, my friend likes to say the angels in the details.
Details, but yeah. Yeah, we can look at that. And in fact, it might take more of an attorney's opinion as well. And there's just a lot of players you get involved with the Army Corps of Engineers, the state of Michigan.
Yeah.
And where are you putting this? Is it on lease bottom lands of the state of Michigan? Number one, is where are you putting it? That there's a lot of stuff going on there.
That'd be appreciated.
Okay. Moving on. Now we'll go to new business. Discussion of a proposed zoning ordinance that would amend sections 400 and 401 of Appendix A to remove housing barriers. So for that, I'm going to turn it over to City Manager Terry.
Sure, I'll just turn it over to Zach Sopples, our city planner, and let him explain it all because I'm not getting involved in this. He's the guy, so I'll turn it over to Zach.
And I want to be clear, I'm only involved here at the tail end. There's been a lot of legwork that's been put in on this, and I'm just throwing at the finish line. So I'll just start right off here at the 400, the intent. So as a zoning administrator, the intent is where I go back to a lot when things are right in the middle where I could see going either way, and it's okay, I'll go back to the intent. And I think what the planning commission was trying to do here is to really help emphasize that accessory dwelling units are a historic part of the neighborhoods, and we shouldn't be ignoring them or trying to restrict them any more than necessary. The language here by removing the where are we going here? The current language
by saying it's designated to be the most restrictive of the residential districts. I think by removing that language and saying we want to be restrictive here is inherently part of our master plan that says, hey, we're not necessarily trying to be restrictive, we're open to other uses, but we still want to maintain the character, and that's why there's the addition here of continue the historic development pattern of primarily single family dwelling, detached dwellings. So I think we should probably just go section by section. So if you guys have any questions on this one in particular, I'd be happy to answer them.
The first section,
So we get the First Amendment, that's why he's talking about that.
number one, do we need to share this so the public knows what we're talking about, or shall we just point it up here? There's the current language and the proposed language change. Could you give us any highlights of what the biggest changes of that is?
So removing that word restrictive, I think for me as a planner, that's really telling and saying that we're not trying to restrict it to only single families. We're open to those detached accessory dwelling units. It's an option. It goes into more detail later, but this is kind of the intent that we're open to that idea.
Mr. Shields.
Thank you, Mayor. So my question is that when I read that and hear that, then so historically, duplexes and triplexes were not part of the historical pattern of development historically. And what historical range are we talking about?
That's exactly it. Is what are we saying historically? So when the city was built, carriage houses, and that's why you see a lot of these houses that are so small, or will have rooms above the garage, or they're barn-like. That's kind of the intent when we're here, when we're speaking about historically. So in the last previous few decades, I would say, where it was more restricted to be suburbanized and say, no, we want single family, large lots, open space, not really close to your neighbor. Well, that's still a part of it, allowing some of those, mother-in-law suites, I think we call them now. Oftentimes, the groundskeeper might stay in something like that. So to kind of keep with the historic character of having that use, but in a modern twist, if that makes any sense.
Mr. Moore.
So my overall, shouldn't green be on? I don't know, maybe it's just me.
Backwards.
My overall question for you, and again, I apologize because I was not sitting on this council during all the dialogue about this, and unfortunately, I missed the public hearing, so I have a lot of questions. But my initial question is, what is the goal of this proposed amendment?
So the goal here would be to allow for the regulation of accessory dwelling units to help to densify the area slowly with restrictions. There's a lot of restrictions as those details come in later. I know saying density can be kind of frightening, but there are restrictions here that help to kind of ease that blow and that reeling back when you hear density.
So the goal is to densify the neighborhood.
It's to allow different housing options. I've lived in a camper for the last few months. I have nowhere to rent. I'm the prime example of different housing options being allowed in the area.
Well, this is actually a great follow-up from my next. I think there's a general consensus that we have a pressing need for more affordable housing. I'm going to just wing it on that one. Do we have any evidence or data to support the idea that this amendment will enhance the availability of affordable housing? That's my question.
Yeah, so City of Traverse City is a prime example, and they put on a presentation, I think the day after these amendments had their public hearing, and they spoke to how beneficial this was to have that diversity in housing for them. Just having those different options at different price points. I mean, in our case, these are rented options. That being said, there's going to be a spectrum, but that's the diversity that we need.
So the evidence that we have or the data that we have that this will provide more affordable housing is it did so in Traverse City?
That's just one example.
Ms. Walker.
Thanks, Mayor. So the data, oh, thank you. Sorry, thank you. So the data really and why we're doing this, so the overall arching objective here isn't just about ADUs, it's about removing barriers to housing. And starting in 2017, Housing North and the Little Traverse Bay Housing Partnership laid out the whole plan. Starting in 2017, you can see it's all documented, presented to City Council and to the Planning Commission. There's a plan, we know how many units of single-family homes we need in Emmett County down to the mill of Petoskey, how many rental units we need in Emmett County down to how many we need in Petoskey. So this has been a long time in the works, and we're just starting to nick away at those lowest hanging fruits. This is what I understand of barriers that exist to housing in our ordinances. And so the first one is an example of how we used to talk about, or the language that was included are designated to be the most restrictive of the residential districts. That even when we had our planning commission meeting with the city council and the planning commission, I said, wow, that sounds really elitist. Like, that sounds like something that you absolutely want to remove that barrier, because that just sounds elitist to me. And now we have it under the auspice of like a historic district. So I'm still not necessarily sure that by saying, you know, being less restrictive, but saying that we want to remain like the historic quality, I have some questions about like what exactly that means, because when you're talking about historic districts, you're really talking about all over Petoskey, but you're mostly talking about Ward 1. Because that's where the Victorian houses are on the hill, right? That's a lot of the historic development. And there's historic houses littered throughout every ward. But if we're working on amendments to remove barriers to housing, we have just started with those lowest hanging fruits, ADUs, single family dwelling restrictions, and the zonings. I mean, this is just the start, and there's so much more that we could be doing and that we've been advised since 2017 to tackle. So I would disagree that it's just about ADUs. It's about bigger zoning ordinance amendments to remove housing barriers. And that's always been how I've viewed it as the lens and the why we're doing what we're doing.
Mr. Moore.
Just as a point of clarification, my question was broadly speaking to the entire ordinance, not just ADUs.
Okay, yeah.
Mr. Shields.
Thank you, thank you, Mr. Moore, for that setup question and for just getting us to why we're doing this. And yeah, part of the history is presentations from Housing North. It is, you know, I have in front of me a article from AARP, what that stands for.
American Association for Retired People.
Thank you. I have a whole information about how accessory dwelling units can benefit a community with an aging population and all ages. And it also talks about affordability. And I think what Housing North, if I remember right, you know, encouraging in their housing ready checklist, they're reminding us it's not, you know, yes, we want more affordable or attainable housing, but it's also just about increasing housing at any level, which will benefit all income brackets. So it is about densifying or just allowing for more development opportunities, whether that's density or as compact neighborhoods.
Mr. Moore.
Well, I just think in follow-up, what I'm struggling with is, does more remove the barrier of affordability? More, I'm always looking at how do we get from where we are to where we want to be. That's kind of like with my lumber lofts statement that I made earlier. And so I'm not saying I'm for or oppose this. I'm just having difficulty seeing how more alone removes the barrier of affordability, which I think is a huge problem in Petoskey and surrounding areas.
I think to answer your question would be a supply and demand question. If there's a surplus of housing, they're inherently going to be cheaper, be more affordable.
Well, and smaller units, this is what we're, accessory dwelling units provides an opportunity for smaller units. Theoretically, I know that, again, it's market driven, but the smaller unit may be an opportunity for a lower cost option. Yeah, I have a question about just, again, backing up the process. I don't know if I've been in a council meeting where we've really discussed zoning ordinance amendments, the process for this initial discussion. What are the procedures? Like, if we're going to go through and comment on what we think about this, does it go back to the planning commission? Do we? No. So what is, so we discuss this changes we want to see, and the public hears that, and then we vote on that. How does this work?
This is a discussion, so this would be the first step. If there were not a lot of changes, it could come back to city council at the next meeting. If there are changes or a request by council or enough support for changes that they're not happy with in this, to send it back to the downtown, to the planning commission, then we would start that process of sending it back. If there's minimal changes, we can move forward with it. But if there's large changes that you guys want to make to this stuff that Zach is covering right now, large changes, then we'll need to send it back to the planning commission to address it. Okay. That's how it's always been.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So this is basically a first reading.
This is your introduction of the zoning ordinance, and if you make, as long as you don't make any substantial changes, you can make the second council meeting, you could approve it. If there's substantive changes, then the next, we'll make those changes, and that becomes the new first introduction. Then we go through the process again.
Here, or we can send it back to the downtown.
Or you can decide to take it back to
the planning commission. So we have a choice from what directions you want to go.
Thank you.
Zach, do you want to continue? There's no discussion on number 1. No? Can we move forward?
I guess number one, I'm not sure about the use of the word historic development pattern. Just say continue the pattern of primary single family detached dwellings is a holdup, but I've thrown it out there as an option.
Mr. Moore.
Sorry, I have one more question here. Can you tell me what the definition of an other residentially related facilities is?
So home-based businesses would be a prime example there. There's other uses that are allowed in a residential area that aren't necessarily considered residence. They're often accessory to, or related.
Are they structures or uses?
They would be uses.
Okay, and is that defined somewhere then?
It's in the zoning ordinance for each district.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Zach, let's move to number 2.
Yeah. So under 1C, the current language reads the dwelling unit shall have a minimum exterior width of 24 feet and a minimum depth of 24 feet. Attached garages shall not be included in width or depth measurements. Again, I think the intent here is to not be so restrictive and just say, hey, let's have it at 600 square feet. There's a lot of different lot sizes and shapes that could allow for an accessory dwelling unit, but it might not be 24 feet. It might be longer. It might be shorter. It could go up. There's other options, and this kind of allows to remove that restriction there.
But this isn't accessory dwelling units. This is a single dwelling unit.
This is, yes. So, yeah. Did I read it?
You said
It's on my brain. I'm sorry.
Oh, so this is for any dwelling unit.
Correct.
So it's basically, otherwise, if you multiply it out, it's at 576. So basically, all we're saying is we're rounding it off instead of 700 and whatever, or 500, we're going to 600. That gives it more options for dimensions. Any problems with that? Any concerns, Mr. Shields?
Do the county just lower their minimum dwelling size? Do we know what that is, and why not just go with that? square footage.
So the county has been tweaking their language as well. I know one of the big things is that they allow their accessory dwelling units to be mobile homes.
Okay.
And I think there's an avoidance for that in the city.
What is the state require, what is the county requirement for dwelling unit square footage?
It recently changed and I don't know off the
It
top of
was
my head.
1,000 or 900, wasn't it? To 900?
I
think it's like 800.
I thought it was in the 500 range.
Okay, so that, yeah.
That's what I saw. I think what I was getting at is I think we're making it 600 higher than the higher standard than the county is. And again, is that antithesis of what we're trying to do.
Well, and I think the goal here for the planning commission is put our toe in the water. We can always loosen the restrictions later. It's a whole lot harder to reel them back.
Got it.
So,
Yeah, it's harder if we put our toe in the water, it's harder to reel them back after it's set though, too, right? What is the number of people that are allowed to occupy? Is there a limit by the state or the county for how many people could live in a 600 unit address?
housing or the county building inspector would be in charge of issuing the occupancy permit. What that number is, I'm not going to pretend to know. That is outside of my wheelhouse.
Okay, so there is that requirement that would carry on to this. So you're not going to, with the 600 foot, end up with 10 people living there. Mother Hubbard and all of her kids aren't going to be able to live in it. 600 unit. Why?
Well, whatever the county says.
Yeah. Don't
I have a
bad mouth the
question, ma'am.
county. You work there. Ms. Walker?
Thank you. I had a question about that as well, because if we're going from 576 square foot to 600 square foot, and there was two other people besides myself at the public hearing that mentioned that maybe you would consider something smaller, because in terms of infill development, like those two Clarion lot properties that we had tried to auction off previously, they're very narrow, and there's several examples of very small and narrow lots. Who's to say, or maybe they would just have to go through zoning board of appeals if they wanted to build a 500 square foot house or a 400 square foot house on an infill development. But it was mentioned, and planning commission decided to move forward with the 600 square feet. And now that Zach kind of explains why you would go with something like that versus the 576 24 by 24 being more restrictive, I guess that kind of makes a little bit more sense. And what you also said about dipping your toe in the water and seeing how that plays out, as opposed to having to change the rules later on because we went too far. So I just thought I would mention that. Thank you.
Zach, could you, oh, wait, Mr. Wagner?
Just wanted one quick comment, my turn. Quick comment to Lindsay's point on it not just being Ward 1. Then I walk by homes on Lake Street just about every day, shared driveway, 2-story garage, housing up above. Hopefully that fits the definition as well.
We're moving on, we're going now to item 3.
So this one's, yeah, a bit longer. These are helping to add to those restrictions and really help, oh boy, help define the situation here. Currently, the zoning ordinance doesn't have any sort of, I guess, restriction. This helps to kind of shape that. So they're still falling under bulk requirements as far as there's setbacks, there's height limiting, things like that. Then going on to B, a 2-family dwelling shall meet parking requirements. So parking requirements are still an aspect there to be met. Part C, it says 2-family attached dwellings shall be architecturally compatible in size and character with the surrounding neighborhood. So avoiding super chic glass buildings as well as mobile homes, things like that. It's on both ends of the spectrum there. Part D says a two-family dwelling shall not allow a garage to protrude beyond the front building plane. Again, that's just to help with the setback issues and with the character of the neighborhood as well.
Is that the same? Is that the same as a single family home that garage cannot protrude beyond the building plane?
So this is under two-family attached dwellings.
Okay. Yeah, but is just a single family home, can a garage go in front of the house? Or if it can extend, if even if it's attached, can the garage extend further?
If as long as it met setback requirements right now. It could.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. I think we're on E. So for conversion of an existing building, the second dwelling entrance shall not be located on a non-street fronting building facade. That helps again with neighborhood, helping to allow for these units while also dispersing them, dispersing traffic, foot traffic, as well as potential parking traffic and things like that. F says an exterior stairway to an upper level dwelling shall only be located on the side or rear of the structure and within the required building setbacks. And that's again, kind of helping to disperse the traffic, the movement, as well as you're not seeing a line of doors.
So I'll just plow forth here. So what are the current rules regarding 2-unit dwellings in R1 and R2? So I see like people who have garage apartments. I mean, what is permitted now?
So currently, I would put that under a separate, hopefully, a separate complete housekeeping unit with separate entrance, kitchen, sleeping area, and full bathroom facilities with an attached or detached extension to an existing single-family structure. That's the definition of accessory dwelling as it sits currently in the ordinance. And I would put it under that.
Okay.
And depending on what district that lies in would regulate, where it's located, if it were a new structure. So that if it's an existing structure, it's kind of out of my control.
Mr. Moore.
Did I miss your question there?
I'm not sure it got answered, but that's okay. Let's move on for just a minute. Am I correct then in reading this that there would be no limit theoretically in 2-unit dwellings in R1 and R2 as long as those standards in 8A through F are met? So just theoretically, hypothetically, there's no limit on these 2-unit.
On number of units, you're saying, in that parcel?
No, I'm saying.
Just in general.
In R1 and R2, under this provision, there's no limit on 2-unit dwellings. Theoretically, if they meet A through F, A through F, every single family dwelling could be a 2-unit dwelling. Is that correct or not correct?
It goes on later, and I think it might be in the next one where it limits it to 10.
That's
per year
ADUs.
for the ADUs. You're
So I'm
saying
just referencing only 2-unit dwellings.
2-unit dwellings.
Yep.
Then yes, theoretically that could be done. As it sits now with not setback, lot coverage. There's lot coverage requirement. There's other measures that would go into help
Correct. If those measures are met, unlike the ADUs, which we're limiting to 10 a year for this proposal, there's no such limitation on 2-unit dwellings.
Correct, if it's allowed in that district. Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Thank you.
Mr. Shields? Nope. Ms. Walker?
Thank you. So looking at the notes from the planning commission meeting on April 21st. What they were doing, from what I understand, is moving two-family attached dwellings to permitted rather than special condition use. So this language that we see here, Tina, from what I understand, is new language because previously it's now being permitted rather than a special condition use. So that's what I understand. This is new language.
Right.
Right, okay, so I don't know if that answers the question, because now we're going from special condition use to permitted, and these are the provisions for how we make that happen? Okay,
Correct.
Thank you.
Other questions as we go?
All right, let's move on to section 9, subsection 9. This is a long one as well. This is a two-part slide here. So I'll just start, I guess I'll just kind of read through. So it says 1 detached accessory dwelling unit is allowed per residential lot, subject to staff review and approval that the following standards are met. So this is all new language as well. So A says an ADU is permitted on a parcel that has 1 single family dwelling as the permitted principal use. I think we should just go one by one here. So everybody good with that one? We want to discuss?
My questions are broad, so I'll just hold till the end.
Okay.
If that's okay.
Okay. Part B says the property owner shall occupy either the ADU or the single family dwelling on the property except for a temporary absences not to exceed a combined total of 6 months in a calendar year and be the primary residence of the property owner. Tina, I think this kind of goes back to your question earlier on the diversity and the different kinds of units and allowing affordability. So maybe the owner doesn't necessarily have to occupy the primary residence. They could operate, they could occupy the ADU as well. So just adding to the diversity. So any questions on that one? C says an ADU shall not exceed 600 square feet.
So you're saying. So you're saying that you can't be over, but it can't exceed it. What, didn't we talk about it? It has to be at least 600 feet,
no, that's
square feet?
single family.
Was that single family now we're talking?
Yep, there's the primary residence.
The
has to be
primary
at least-
residence,
yeah.
okay, thank you.
Part D, the property cannot exceed the lot coverage allowances of section 1600 of the zoning ordinance. That's goes for everybody, but it's nice to reiterate that. At least 1 off-street parking space shall be provided for the ADU, tandem or stacked parking in a driveway may count toward the off-street parking requirement. Part F, an ADU is not allowed on a property with a shared driveway. And part G, leasing or renting or rental of the ADU for less than 3 months is prohibited.
Okay, Ms. Demore has a question.
Again, apologies, everybody.
Been apologizing.
What was the rationale for the 3-month minimum ADU occupancy? How was that determined?
How is it determined?
Yes, why 3 months?
That's to help with the short-term rental crisis, for lack of a better term.
So here's the follow-up. Can the owner of the main house rent for the balance of the 6 months they're not in residence?
Can you say that again slower?
Sure. So we've got the owner of the main house who has to live there at least 6 months out of the year. My question is for the balance, those other 6 months, let's assume they take that option. Can they rent for the other 6 months, their main house? Okay, so then theoretically, am I correct that on a single property, you could have 6 potential residents per year? 4 in the ADU, if they each rented for 3 months, and 2 in the main house, 1 the owner and 2 the renter. That would be 6.
For the calendar year.
For the
Across the calendar year. Theoretically, yes.
That sounds correct theoretically. Okay. And this is limited, did you already mention it's limited to 10 properties a year?
I think that's coming up.
Okay, sorry, shall I wait or ask?
We can just cruise right next to it unless there's more questions on these ones.
Nope, I'll wait, thank you.
So H says the accessory dwelling unit shall not have separate utility laterals. Section I says a deed restriction that runs with the land on a form to be provided by the city shall be filled with the register of deeds prior to issuance of a zoning permit, and it shall incorporate the following restrictions. 1, the ADU shall not be sold separately from the single family dwelling. 2, shall specify the owner occupancy requirement and rental time. And 3, the deed restriction shall be in effect until the ADU is removed. I imagine there's some questions on this.
Anyone? Mr. Moore?
So given the situation we have currently in Petoskey with short-term rentals and violations of unlicensed properties, renting them, this is happening right now on Rose Street, $300 a night. People get a citation. It really isn't any incentive to cease, even though they're not licensed. So my question relative to 10 properties per year is what will be the enforcement mechanism? And I should add an adjective, an effective enforcement mechanism.
So we're looking at different options on our end here through different software programs. I get a call just about every week from a different software that says they can provide a service to help with enforcement of not ADUs, but short-term rentals rather. So we're looking into those different options and kind of weighing where that goes, as well as the code enforcement officer. I know it's been discussed probably at great length before I arrived.
The code enforcement, I believe, is necessary, and I think it's something I know I've supported right along, and I think we need to take the enforcement part off of the city planner and off of the police department when they're available. I think we need to identify an actual code enforcement person that put it in the budget for next year. I don't know, is it in this year?
Yes.
Well, it's part-time.
For part-time enforcement.
Part-time.
So.
So during the budgetary process in October?
Did that answer your question, Gina?
Yes, it did. I think overall here, my concern is that the setup with the ADUs and the potential for 3-month rentals and owner rental, I just think I see it as enhancing an existing problem we have with enforcement of these rules. And I'm a person who likes fewer rules that are enforced. I think it sends bad messages to have rules that are not enforced. So I just being proactive about seeing this as a concern. Thank you.
To expand on that, so if there's any new ADU that has to come in through a zoning permit, so that's already a red flag of, I already know there's going to be something there. And, oh, you have a bathroom there. Well, now I really know what you're doing. So I automatically would be handing them the form and saying, oh, if you're doing an ADU, here's the form. And moving that process along. So there's already extra scrutiny kind of built into this with the zoning permit that would be required for a new one. Well, I do share your concerns with existing ones.
Yes, Ms. Walker.
Zach, I have a question about H, the accessory dwelling unit shall not have separate utility laterals. How would the utilities then be quantified or charged? Would it be only charged to the principal housing unit, the principal dwelling, and then they would just like prorate or like tell their renter, like, we're gonna charge you this much for your electrical and water and sewer?
It would be, yeah, depending on
Because like
how
in a
they wanted to handle
multifamily
it.
situation, or like when you take a single family and you turn it into multifamily, you have all your utility laterals, so that you as a renter are paying for your consumption of your electricity, water and sewer.
Not
So
all,
that's not how this works here?
not all.
Okay,
I know of a rental place that does not do it that way.
okay. So I guess I'm just wondering why, that was chosen, because in my brain of brains, it's like, oh, you pay for what you consume, and so you should absolutely be quantifying what you're consuming as a consumer on your electricity, water, and sewer, but here you're saying no, and I guess I'm wondering why.
So it's not cheap to put in separate laterals. So this really helps in the long run. It makes it.
With cost.
Makes the cost lower, it makes it more accessible for more people.
Thank you.
Also probably makes it easier for the city if somebody has not paid their bill to have to, a whole other unit that has to be worked with. And then going into the yard and going up to the garage, apartment above the garage. Is that correct?
Not necessarily.
No,
Kind of depends on the circumstances.
but you do have to, but it would add more potential work.
Correct. Yeah.
It's the responsibility of it. Thank you.
Ms. Demore,
Beyond the 600 square foot footprint and the neighborhood appearance compatibility, are there any requirements for the actual type of ADU that would be permitted? I know you've said no mobile homes, but for example, a modular unit, that type of thing. Are there any?
It's definitely possible a modular unit could work in there. And, you know, a well-done mobile home could be possible if it met that criteria. So it's not to say they're forbidden, but they're expected to fit in with the character.
Thank you.
Mr. Shields.
Thank you, Mayor. My question is on that exceed 600 square feet and also you got 1.5 stories. Why, if there's a principal structure that's at 2 stories, why couldn't it be at the same level?
I think this is a case where we're still putting our toes in the water and we can always reel them back later.
Or we could elect to increase that. Yeah.
Let them go.
Yeah, got it.
Either way, yes. I think it's a good starting point, and from here we can really judge within that first year. You know, we might get one, and it's like, okay, let's step back and let's release some restrictions, and if we get a full 10, okay, well maybe we nailed it.
I guess my comment and it's not directed to you, Zach. The general comment is, this is our intent from my perspective in this chair is that we are trying to encourage more housing units, not discourage them. So that's why I will ask that we go right up to allowing it to 2 stories, as long as the principal structure is 2 stories. I'm sensing there is concern for keeping it bottled, but I see the opposite. Let's open it up, and that's again I think the intent of this. So I'm ready to open it up, and we can also I can't put the top back in the bottle or whatever that saying is. We come in, we can change the ordinance again if we are seeing worst case scenarios. I would disagree in that is a worst case scenario of every house, single family house becomes a duplex. Okay, I doubt it, but if it starts going that way, we have the ability to respond. I'm supportive of moving this forward, and maybe ask the council if we're interested in bumping up the 1.5 stories to the same as the principal structure.
Can I'm no expert in any of this, but when you were asking earlier, we were trying to keep this low income housing or affordable housing. I think there was a comment made earlier along the same lines. Okay, the larger you make the unit, you start going 2-story units bigger, than the housing rental and who it might be rented to might become different versus the type of person that you want to target as far as a smaller home. The larger it gets, then you're opening it up to more people. I mean, whatever.
Mr. Moore.
Yeah, just as a point of response, respectfully, Mr. Shields, and perhaps to my colleagues, I don't have a perspective on this. My questions are directed to what are the parameters of what we're looking at? And that's what I'm trying to understand. Thank you.
Want to keep going?
I think we're on J, so no more than 10 accessory dwelling units shall be permitted in a calendar year. Again, this is one where we're dipping our toe in the water. So. If we,
Start small and we can build from there. You
Yep.
see that it's working. 10 is a lot, and
10 could be very shocking if it were all in one block. So I think 10 is fair to spread throughout the city. K says the ADU cannot exceed 1.5 stories, 16 feet, or the height of the principal structure, whichever is less. I think we just kind of discussed that a little bit, unless there's more comments. Nope. L, ADUs are only allowed in rear yard and must be a minimum side yard setback of 5 feet and a rear yard setback of 5 feet. If located on an alley, accessory building setbacks shall apply.
okay.
And M, ADUs shall be compatible in appearance with the neighborhood.
And, okay, so. Are you happy with this at this point, Mr. Shield?
Well, we had a question from the public about that appearance. So I wonder if you could speak to the subjectivity of that and how that is evaluated.
Yes, so there needs to be a little bit of subjectivity. Otherwise, you're bringing every issue to the planning commission, and that discourages development in general. Matching and compatible in appearance with the neighborhood, it was discussed, slope of roofs, materials, colors, things like that. Those would all be considerations. Well, if you list all of them, it becomes restrictive in itself. So now you're building a smaller clone of what's already there, and you squashing creativity. And also that inhibits size, it inhibits a lot of other things. So allowing the subjectivity allows for more units to be able to be feasible.
Anything else, council, at this point? I'm going to open it up to the public to address questions to city council, not to the audience, not to Zach, but to city council, and I will call on Zach at appropriate times. Miss Marshall.
Okay, still at 10:15, Ms. Mitchell. I just have a clarification question. If I live on State Street and I have a garage and I want to make an apartment for my family, I'm not going to rent it. Would I have the same obligations as the ADUs that are rented? And would that count as one of the 10 units?
I would think so, because if it was sold, if it was sold, then it would have to, what are you going to do? Are these, I just think it should stay as is. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, my thinking is always worst case scenario. In this, I always have to think worst case scenario. So if something is sold, I think 10 generations ahead if I can. And that would be the prime example of, well, you might, the person there might have their family, that might not be the concern we have. We don't know what the future holds.
Yeah, come on down.
Matthew Pettig, 906 Michigan Street. Like I said, first want to say that it's great if you're doing more. Not everything that's in there, but yes. I wanted to say about the 2-family question that Tina you brought up, that's actually already in the zoning ordinance. Here, every single residence in the town can be converted to a duplex right now. That we have to go through a permit. But also back to ADUs, the biggest thing that I think is the deed restriction component. We already had it in the zoning ordinance that we already have all that stuff in the ordinance. It seems like a layer of red tape process of dealing with that red tape to go through a deed restriction. It just seems excessive, and I don't see that you get much benefit out of it from the city perspective. It seems like it's just a headache. And I'm also very curious, like, how do you say the city goes, changes it and allows you to rent it out or to not be more occupied? How do you get rid of that? It's just more to deal with. I don't know, maybe it's not that hard. But it's certainly enough to make me hesitate to actually do it. And I would also say, it's like, why would you have, you have, I mean, like I said, dip your toes in the water, but a lot of these, you have kind of excessively restrictive rules for ADUs versus a two-family dwelling, such as the owner occupancy requirement. Like, the only real difference, or there's some subtle differences, but the biggest difference is one's attached and one's not. But if I built a 600 square foot addition on my house and called it a two-family, I don't have to deal with half of these, restrictions here. I have some other things to deal with, but it's like, wow. But anyways, it's a great effort. Toes in the water, go for it.
I think the deed is, the ability, gives the city the options to actually have true enforcement through a court system. Without that deed system, that's the way it has been in the past when Northern Homes and some of those places have worked with homes, is they do put deed restrictions on them so that they have a ability legally to do measures if they need it.
Well, would that mean that there's no legal, I mean, you can't go to court to tell me that I can't do a short-term rental?
The deed restriction certainly helps with the enforcement aspects.
Mr. Shields.
Microphone's off.
With the deed restriction, because it's a legally binding document, overrule, as if the state said that 30% of our housing units had to be open to short-term rental, that one might be off because it's deed restricted. That one would then be off the considerations for short-term rental.
Which I would ask our city attorney that question.
Okay.
I'm pointing, I would point to the city attorney.
And you normally can't over. State law tends to be the higher court, whatever they say is gonna work. And then local, federal, state, local.
I get that.
So if the state says you can't do it, we can't go out and say, yes, we can. So it's,
We've
but
had,
I'd still ask our attorney, whatever the question is.
just like we went back and changed illegal to restrict card reading or
Yeah,
tarot
fortune
reading.
telling, yes.
We changed it because the state law says you cannot control, prohibit that or enforce that. So it'd be the same way as this. You were the one that sent the message to us, no?
No.
Okay, this is another Matt France. I feel we should hit, if people send stuff in, we'll answer the questions. Get a concern to define accessory dwelling, the definition. I think you've taken care of that. He also stated two house attached dwellings could be architecturally compatible in size and shape with surrounding neighborhood. Who defines the standards? That was answered. The 600 foot, he had concerns about that. He said that's pretty small. ADUs cannot exceed a story and a half, 16 feet. Why couldn't you have a 2-story ADU be permissible? We discussed that. Lastly, was compatible in appearance in the neighborhood. Again, he says that's subjective. Why? Who does this? Who defines the standard? We answered that as well. What is an accessory dwelling unit versus an accessory building?
Accessory building could be defined as like a shed, a detached garage, something like that. Yeah.
Not inhabited. I think we answered those questions from that gentleman. I don't think the city ordinance should be requiring that an owner claim as their primary residence. If that's not the case, then
I mean, how
everybody
would you
should,
tax?
then everybody should be renting.
Yeah, or how would you tax for homesteading versus
Yeah, yeah,
non-homesteading property? So that's already regulated.
yeah.
I have a question, Mayor, if I may.
Yes, please.
Ms. Marshall's question, in regards to the accessory dwelling units, there was a discussion at the planning commission about new structures versus existent potential renovated ADUs. So from what I understand, the new language here is just dealing with new dwelling units. Would there be a process for grandfathering in like historic ADUs that now could potentially be renovated? Like where would they fall in that category?
So the regulations we're looking at here would be for the new construction, so that really covers a lot of like the bulk requirements, setbacks, heights, things like
Okay.
that. If that structure exists and it's just converted,
Okay,
I'm not gonna be looking at those issues. I'll be looking at the other ones.
However, the Emmett County Building Inspector will be looking at footing and those type of
Occupancy
things,
load,
which
things
will,
like that.
which will take it into a whole nother
Code.
area. Because
Okay.
if you've got a garage that has no foundation,
right. You can't build a second story, yada, yada.
or,
Okay.
yeah,
In terms of building code.
building codes.
But grandfathering in existent structures would be under a different auspice of building and code and zoning versus building new accessory dwelling units, which is what you're dealing with exclusively here.
Right, well, I think they're.
I'm sorry.
Um. I think what you're focusing on is the new and existing. If it's an existing structure and it can be changed into an ADU, it can be changed into an ADU. I'm just gonna, every time I look at any permit, I go through and I check my boxes to make sure it can fall in those lines. Now, if it is already existing, you can't change a setback, you can't change the height, things like that. So if it fell into something that said, can we skip to back, Sarah? Thank you. So if it said, like ADU shall not exceed 600 square feet, that would be one where I would be like, yeah, it says it can't exceed 600 square feet. You would have to make this smaller somehow if it's partitioned off, something like that.
What about if it is existing garage that is 3 feet, 2 feet from the property line? Would that qualify for a possible ADU?
Correct.
Because it's already there. So,
Unless it's on a shared driveway.
Correct.
I know somebody who wants to convert an historic farmhouse, with a huge garage and has open space. And the conversation is, can we make this open space into a park? So it's not a new structure. The house might be sold in 15 years. So that's, I'm hearing two different things now. Originally, my question was answered, but no, it would be a regular ADU. Now you're saying it's not a new structure, so it wouldn't be included in the 10 that we're talking about. So I'm left with some.
I'm confused at the confusion.
I'm sorry, I'm totally out of your
I didn't, if I was inconsistent, I apologize. I didn't think I was.
do ADUs, if they were to be converted an ADU to a garage top or bottom, whatever, would that count as one of the 10?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
If it exists already.
Yes.
Thank you.
Anyone else, council? I'll now go to the public for weighing in and speaking.
Bill Garrett, 923 State Street. Question and then just a couple comments. 9C says the neighborhood shall not exceed 600 square feet. Is there a minimum? Is there a minimum square footage for an ADU?
That would be up to the building code and occupancy load. So if Emmett County Building said you can't live in 100 square foot area, that would be a restriction that is out of my control.
Thank you. When Councilmember one brought up, I think, an interesting question regarding the rental of primary residence. The question was primary residence with an ADU, and if could that primary residence be rented for up to 6 months? I think it's an interesting question. Council might want to consider that.
Do you have an opinion?
Items 9B, C, E, and G are all specific restrictions regarding ADU, which is fine. But I would recommend, and you're brought up with this, you've already budgeted for a compliance person. I certainly recommend that council appoint that compliance person before enacting this ADU. Thank you.
Anyone else wish to speak?
Hi, Brent Boland, 208 Fairview Avenue. I just want to commend the council for taking the step forward. I think ADUs can be an important part of the mix for making the community more affordable. I mean, I don't want to bore you with my personal story, but I barely was able to buy a house when I moved here. And if I moved here now, I couldn't. Your new planner hasn't been able to. It's a big problem. We're trying to hire. Lack of places to live is affecting that. We're very small. Much bigger businesses are having this issue. So I think every little thing helps. And Councilmember Shields made the point that adding supply is the most important thing. Because we have a situation now where, where I live, there's more than one house that's occupied less than half the year because somebody wants to be in Petoskey, but they don't have options. There's not a condo they can live in during the summer. So they buy a house that's empty most of the year. That could be housing for year-round residents, and it's not. So having more options at different price points and sizes in the mix is really important for solving this problem and making Petoskey a more livable place. So thank you for working on this. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak to council at this time? Sarah, is there anybody online that wishes to speak? There being none, council, are you good with moving this forward then? Is there any major changes that you wish to address at this point? No? Okay, you can always disagree or bring up stuff at the next meeting when we will have a possible motion. Moving right along, new business. Discussion of the Darling Lot design guidelines as presented by the Walker Parking Consultants. Who do I call on?
Call on me.
Mr. Altieri.
Sure. Sure, we had our joint meeting there, we looked at the Darling Lot presentation by Walker Parking Consultants. And in that meeting, the consultant was looking at 3 specific areas that we'd like to get more input on from the city as far as what you'd like to see in designs going forward. And I put them down, I guess they're up on the screen too. The items include the type of deck you would have. And if you would be a covered deck, and if it's a covered deck, would there be solar panels or would there be a green roof? Also, what level of architectural exterior you'd like to have, like a low, medium, high type architectural, so high end, low end, middle of the road. And then also the parking spaces, whether they should be perpendicular or angled. So I mean, those were the 3 things he was kind of looking to get input on from council. And as far as the next step, I didn't know, since we didn't meet with the board, if the council wanted to come up with what you feel that those items should be, and the council present that to the DMV for their discussions. But that's up for you to decide.
It should go through the planning commission as well, shouldn't it?
I do not think so. I think that As far as, not as far as this goes, right?
Okay.
I mean, the plan will go to the planning commission
Plan will go to
eventually,
the planning commission,
but I don't think the design elements at
Okay,
this point
no.
will need to go through the planning commission.
but the plan will.
Correct.
Okay. Also, do you wish to give Mr. Terry some feedback on this? Ms. Walker?
Sure, I'll start. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Al Terry, for that synopsis. So I guess having had this meeting and bringing the DMB together with the Walker consultants and city council, I felt like it was kind of done in a vacuum. There's no mention anywhere in the presentation or the plan that this is an MEDC redevelopment ready property, that it's the only redevelopment ready property that's owned by the city of Petoskey of our 5 locations. And economic development investment in a parking structure, I don't think would qualify for an MEDC property. Maybe it would, but MEDC hasn't been able to realize any projects in the city of Petoskey in quite some time, if at all, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, because I could totally be, but I just, like, they didn't even know that we owned our own utilities, and there was no mention of MEDC or redevelopment ready, and so I was like, this feels like it's being done in a vacuum, and it's being decided by a parking committee. So for all of those reasons, I was very hesitant to receive and like accept any of the information, like admittedly, so.
Ultimately, it will all come to city council. Ultimately, it will be your decision if this were to move forward or not. Everything from the financing, et cetera. So I think it was a good first step. It was, here's what we've come up with. The downtown management board paid for that appraisal of what was available, what to do. I thought that they gave some feedback. They gave feedback after we left at the downtown management board meeting, and now Al is coming here and saying, "Hey, throw in your 2 bits to this as well."
Thanks.
Mr. Shields.
Thank you, Mayor. I will echo what Ms. Walker was saying. I feel like in the past, I'll speak for myself, I've expressed in our action plan meeting that I really only I want to see a mixed use development project. So housing, commercial, et cetera, some tax generating revenue on that prime real estate property and not just a parking garage. I've expressed that in the past. So I will echo what Ms. Walker is saying. I felt like this came out of a lack of discussion with council before spending that money. And so maybe frustrated. I guess, and 2 hands. One hand, information is good. And, that helps with having discussion to have that Walker study. But I felt like there was some contingent of council saying that we really wanted to see and bring up the discussion of the mixed use. And so looking at these options, I will decline to comment on any of them and express my interest in a mixed use.
Prior to you, how long have you been on city council?
Correct. The new council turns over often, hence.
Well, I don't know about often. Some,
so
people have been around, but the thing is, this was discussed in the cost of a 5-story building. Any business that goes in there is going to increase your parking because what we are planning on doesn't include what kind of parking you would need for a grocery store, housing. All of that would take up into your parking. So basically, you could be eating into your net profit for the parking that you thought you were going to get by increasing by 2 levels. That was part of it. The city looked at it, and I believe, I'm just guessing here, it was well over $10 million. It was, Becky was 11 million, and that was 5 years ago. Yeah, I'm willing to bet you it would be an $18,000 to $20,000 project, and nobody has come forward when we were doing this with any interest in investing in this project.
It was 17 million, the proposal I really liked.
Well, I love it too.
3 years ago. And so there's,
Nobody came forward and said, hey, I'm willing to invest into this and build this.
sure, I appreciate that. I, wanted to have that discussion, and that's kind of what I'm expressing now.
Yeah. Do you have somebody interested in?
It's a MEDC ready community. There is a more, I'll say this at my comments at the end. There is the state, and I know a lot of people are saying that we are at a moment that's unlike any other generation, or once in a generation, I think it's the correct phrase, once in a generation opportunity of funding, of leveraging lots of funding right now to do projects such as that one. So it's just the desire to have that conversation, which sounds like we still can. And as we also discussed this, so I'm fine continuing forward. I just wanted to, that was the comment I want to submit.
My concern is the 17 million would end up being 23 million. My concern would be that 17 million is 23 to 25 million. We're not getting any extra parking out of it, really. We had neighbors that were upset at a 5-story building when we, there's all of those pieces involved, but, if you think there's money there, we can hold off until you can find it. I just don't know. I don't think we're gonna find the amount of money that is needed or the developer to do this. But if we do, I'm happy, let's do it. Mr. Moore.
One question I had, since again, I'm new to this as well, is how this would be paid for, the structure. Do we?
It's a question we have with every project, and that's kind of why this hasn't happened in the 29 years I've been here.
Downtown Management Board has what, $1 million saved, 900,000 saved up so far?
$1 million.
So the best bet would be to get the county to pony up and build a parking structure jointly together on the corner of Lake and Division Street.
The trouble is that that's not as centrally located as the Michigan Street lot is for people that would be housed, renting apartments up above these buildings, the walk to downtown. It is a more isolated area. It's not as big either by any means.
But it has the density of employees.
Right. It'd be much more feasible financially for.
And we would only own, what is there, 50 lots there, or 50 spaces there, so we're.
Becky can speak to that one.
50.
About 100 in the 2 lots.
Right, but we only have 50 of them. So we would increase ours 50 because the county isn't gonna give us their 100 lots and say, oh, here, go ahead and take it.
But whether it's our cars or their cars off the street, into that lot, provide more parking on street then.
Mayor,
Yes.
can you answer if MEDC does a parking structure qualify for does a parking structure qualify for MEDC funds for redevelopment ready? Is that something that they would legitimately fund? Because that maybe that changes the equation.
I am not aware of anything that they would do.
I'd be surprised.
When you get into, like we say, the housing component, when you add that in, the
Right.
business component, which means you're gonna go up, whatever, number of
Commercial,
stories.
retail.
That's also when you would get into the TIF proposals, because you gotta have a taxable value, taxable property there, which you're not gonna have, which is the city-owned parking deck. But then you're going up stories, and then you need to provide additional parking for whatever you're putting on the deck to account for that as well. So, but that's where you get the TIF financing to pay for the project.
Mr. Moore?
I'm just curious because there was this repurposing component that was discussed. Where if you might repurpose, there was up to a 10% premium, likely 10 to 25%, certain more than 25%. Would anything like that fit it into perhaps qualifying for MEDC? You see where I'm going with this?
Yeah, I wondered the same thing too. I have no.
I couldn't tell.
I don't know. Becky?
In my experience, MEDC is looking for mixed-use projects, and as it's laid out here, would not be a mixed-use.
Right.
Even with that potential for repurposing in it?
I think Jim Leonard would say, depends who's sitting at the table, like, got up against the wall to see the sticks. I mean, that might, but in general, I would say no.
Mr. Shields? You wanted to say something? Oh, really?
Mr. Wagner.
I'm just gonna share what was going through my head when I read this. One is that I pulled out our action plan, and covered parking is a priority. I had that read. So our action plan, covered parking is a priority, so it makes sense that somebody would be looking at it. Somebody said to me recently, you know, shopping is all about convenience, and I would argue that there's plenty of parking about 6 blocks away, and I'm happy to walk, but that's not convenient for most people, so more parking is an economic development fit, but I don't know that Dan Leonard would agree. It might be a bit of a stretch. And then the biggest challenge for me is the dollars. That it feels like just parking without some other income stream is going to be just a major challenge. And it's like, man, if you could build this and also have some retail or some housing or something, and increase the number of spots, which nobody's shown us that plan yet, that would help justify it.
To me, covered parking will bring more people downtown, living downtown. We had close to getting a hotel downtown. I think, to me, covered parking allows people to come downtown during the wintertime and not have to clean off your car, scrape ice off the windshield for those staying overnight. To me, that covered parking facilitates a lot of needs for the city of Petoskey. Not just the tourist, but I'm thinking of local residents coming downtown. I'm thinking of the apartments, especially. We need to continue to expand our use of apartments in all of these vacant buildings that we have right now. And I think the only way to do it is for parking is they're not going to be able to build parking, but we need to provide it and somehow pay for it. Yes, Mr. Moore.
Well, for me, I'm just hard pressed to start making choices about things when I don't understand how it's going to be paid for.
Right.
I mean, the solar panels they gave us, these are very, very rough numbers, but you know, added cost of $850,000 just to cover parking spaces are up to 1.4 billion for the whole top. Again, very rough numbers, but I just don't feel like I'm in a position to make these kind of decisions or suggestions when I don't know how we're going to fund it. So
It's all gonna require some type of bonding. So the more you spend, the more you're gonna have to bond. So, I mean, to me, the obvious things is no, there's not, the green roof should go out. Yeah, there's no reason for that. And then the architectural exterior, probably the middle of the road to me would be the way to go. And then the solar panels, I would personally exclude. I don't feel there's a payback on those. You know, if the city would want to put in a couple of them, so basically you could help feed what the building needs. I think that could work, but solar paneling, the whole thing, just, I don't see where the money's there as far as your rate of return on investment. For solar panels to pay for the jobs.
And it could be that the roof is left plain until that decision is made.
Because that can be done afterwards also.
It could be an add-on, basically.
And that would help us get closer to our renewable energy goals by 2035, so that,
It's not gonna be a big boost, I don't believe.
well, but every public demonstration adds up.
Yeah, I agree.
That's what-
Miss Becky Goodwin.
I'm sorry that you feel this was done in a vacuum. The manager board took this on as a project because of conversation that was at council last year. Now we've had a change in city manager, but it was added to our budget to do this year with council approval to get this study because people were saying, council and people in the audience, all we ever need to see on that lot is just one platform. We just need to increase the parking. It'd be great if we're covered. That would be a wonderful thing. Let's have a study done on that. We have a lot of studies done. This is kind of like kicking tires. It's like, we'll get the study done and we'll know how much this costs. And then we'll know, okay, how do we do it? Or should we do some kind of mixed use project in some other way? And maybe that's still a possibility. You know, times change every 2-3 years, every day they change. But this is, I don't want to say this is part of our lining the wall of studies, but it's homework that needs to be done before we decide what we want to do. Walker came and they've put a lot of work into this, and they came and they asked these basic questions because they're gonna give us a finished product. And that finished product will be tailored to the information that we gave them. And they're looking for direction when they come up with that finished product. There was a lot of talk at city council in the last 2 or 3 years, especially, should the Darling lot even be on the list of sites for RRC? And this is an option to take it off and not do it through RRC, to do it publicly. So I'm sorry you feel it's in a vacuum. I didn't feel that way. But it's part of homework to get the job done, and we need to be moving forward to getting that job done in some way.
Well said.
I tried.
Any other council comments, questions? Sounds like, I take it you don't want to support this project, Mr. Shields?
Yeah, I'm gonna stay consistent. What I've said all along about this project is that I don't support a parking only structure, and that they doing that is putting the burden on our future residents of upkeep and maintenance and eventually replacement. And that we're also missing a prime opportunity, a prime location to do some more sort of mixed use. Questions of paying for this, part of that is generating tax revenue. So I think that we can, I want to continue to ask council that we revisit a mixed use to receive. Maybe we don't increase parking units, but we keep the same amount of parking units, but we get a covered parking solution. So I agree with you, Mayor, that covered parking is a asset that we're missing, and we can do that while also generating tax revenue in a prime location. So that is what I support.
So you're saying we wouldn't increase parking for the public?
So the numbers that I saw in that $17 million study was something like increasing by 53 units. So I consider that with covered parking and development on a prime location a win, and that's my analysis.
But that 53 would be eaten up by whatever's up above it or below it. So basically what you're saying is you want commercial development on that, and increased parking is not a priority.
That is from my perspective. I'm yes.
It's all good. We disagree, but yes.
No, I don't mean to throw a wrench in the system here.
Yeah.
But if mixed use is the direction that we're looking, I think we have to remember that inherently height is going to be involved in that. And I know that's a discussion in all coastal communities that is not well favored. But to get the parking that's wanted and to add the other units that are going to have to offset going up is pretty much your option.
Mr. Moore.
I will just mention that before this meeting, I reviewed the stakeholder and public input. You may have as well. And that was some significant input that they wanted the height was a factor in the concern about the development. And the other was fitting with existing building character, among other needs. But there was also recognition of the need for parking. And some people thought parking alone was not the highest use of the property. So that was kind of the mix of feedback.
Mr. Wagner.
Based on what Becky asked or suggested and what Al said, I would support finishing the homework assignment and focusing on covered because it's in the action plan, but not solar and green. And not even planning for a future green because that added a lot of cost, as I recollect. And I'm going with medium grade to get some direction.
So looking at what this would cost doing what we're looking at.
Medium covered. Yes, I would agree moving forward with that parameter to give Walker some more direction seems fair.
And then after that, if we are not happy with that and you guys want to say, no, we're not going to do this, we want development up and around it or in it, then
Want to go
then
back
we
to
can go there.
Rob?
But let's finish this process that we've got right now. I'm sure that Al will give you an idea on the cost, after the costs come back, of how we would afford this with bonds, how that process would take place. Ultimately, it would come out of the city's general fund if,
There'd be a number of sources. You would have bond debt and with the parking fees.
Right.
I could only pay for the annual bond payment.
Right.
And
But
then
if we-
whatever else would come down from cash. But
yeah, but ultimately.
ultimately, the city's on the hook if something
On the
doesn't
hook
happen.
if something were to happen, there's downturn and nobody parked in that thing and all cars stopped moving. City would be responsible for those payments, yes. Okay.
So Mayor, in terms of moving forward with what
Yes.
they need,
Yeah.
forgive me. So in terms of moving forward with what we're being asked
Right.
for tonight, do you need us to have a vote on that, or do you need some kind of consensus?
Well, I'm looking for a consensus on three
Because
things.
Brian just threw out medium, covered, forget about B and C for now.
And perpendicular
Is that right?
parking.
The perpendicular
Oh,
parking.
and perpendicular, you said?
Oh, I did not say
missed-
that.
I missed.
Perpendicular picks up more spaces than.
I would have said that.
You would have
I see
said
that one up
Nick?
there.
Okay.
Perfect.
Are you guys good with moving towards
Yes,
that
more
as a
spots.
feedback?
Okay.
Is there anybody that wants something different?
I'm okay with that.
We have a consensus. Would you
So moved.
so move?
Can somebody move it or, I mean, it'd be nice to have a council just to move it. So I have a council resolution saying these three items. Can I get a council?
You want a
resolution?
motion
A
then?
motion and a support.
You want a motion? Mr. Wagner?
I motion to give the guidance to downtown management board to pursue the homework assignment, coming back with, some cost estimates based on perpendicular medium architecture style and covered roof without solar and green.
I second.
I have a
that
motion from Mr. Wagner. I have a second from Ms. Walker. Is there any other discussion, council? I have to ask the public if they would like to weigh in. Come on down, whoever you want to speak. I see we have a bunch of them, so ladies first.
So Katie, so I did have a question, I guess it's I have to ask you, with all the talk about self-driving cars, is Walker preparing for technology to allow people to have some kind of stickers so that they can, with their self-driving car, access parking? Is that part of future technology? And then my comment is for you, Lindsay. But that parking lot is the only site, redevelopment ready site, that has been on the MTC website forever, since it's been a site, and there have been no plans coming forward. There's been none. So that's, and part of that reality, I think, is the cost of building now is huge. And you all know, I'm sure, that the 7-Eleven is back on the market. The cost of building is huge. So I don't think we can see an affordable, a developer coming.
Right, okay.
Next.
Beth High from 1111. When I visited Philadelphia, about 6 years ago, they had a parking structure that was actually free. Obviously, it's a much larger municipality than Petoskey, but it was winter and I was visiting, and it was absolutely a breath of fresh air. It was a walk from where we were, dining and whatnot, but it was also free and covered, and I didn't have to cover, scrape my windshield. Petoskey needs covered parking, like you said. What we have right now, if nothing goes forward about this, it's just gonna stay what it is right now, and that's parking. I mean, that you can go through that anytime, and there is, there's no spaces hardly ever free. So I personally, as someone who lives in Petoskey, I feel like it is obviously it's in the ground, stages of this planning and whatnot, but I think it's a really great idea. Yes, we would love to have, I've seen that study that happened like 5 years ago or whatever, And yeah, those 53 spaces would be completely eaten up by the people shopping and working and living in those mixed use areas. So it would almost be a negative benefit. But also I've seen how y'all park up here, and I would not say perpendicular spaces would be the best idea. So weigh in on that.
Okay. You understand it picks up 3 more spaces.
But you have more space in between, so you don't actually hit the cars as you go.
They recommend this. I use my truck.
Okay.
Man.
6 Michigan Street. Apologize, this is not super well thought out in my head, but the whole conversation on parking has me a bit frustrating because there's a significant tie that nobody really sees yet between affordable housing and designing cities for cars, which is what we have done for the last 40 years. And it should be getting more obvious to people. Us, I think the average is probably about $1,000 a month, all in car ownership, maintenance, depreciation, gas. That's not insurance. $1,000 a month for car ownership. And when you design for ubiquitous cars, where everyone needs a car to get to everywhere they need to go, then it just spreads the footprint of the city out. It just, which then makes the infrastructure unaffordable. So now your infrastructure is going to eat your city budgets. So we're coming to this point where you have to choose. Are we going to build for cars, or are we going to live affordably? We're kind of at that point. It's affecting some people a lot more than others, but it's going to get worse. It's not going to get better. It's not going to be solved by electric cars. Those are actually going to be more expensive. It's not going to be solved by automated cars. It's not a technology problem. It's a resource problem. Cars are huge consumptions of resources, energy and materials. And they have created this bloated infrastructure that is expensive. So it's just unaffordable at this point. It was affordable when energy was cheap. It's not affordable with expensive energy. Are we going to go back to cheap energy? Then my point is, I don't think we are. And the only real solution we have to this is density, because the only reason, because you need to do transit, you need public transportation, but it doesn't work in low density. It doesn't work in auto-oriented cities. You have to have a certain concentration of people in order to do transit. So it's a long, I mean, this is a multi-decade process that we're going to have to all our cities back. But we have to begin thinking about it in that way, because I don't think we're going back to cheap energy. And so infrastructure, auto ownership is going to continue to eat our budgets and make housing unaffordable for more and more, make living unaffordable.
Right. Ms. Marshall.
I'm sorry, I just have to say, I agree with you about density and affordability. Downtown businesses need people to drive their cars downtown. Downtown businesses do not rely and survive on local people shopping there. People in northern Michigan drive downtown, they drive to the ski hills, they drive to the beach, they drive to and they will continue.
That doesn't, the money will not matter. Up there. For the tourists coming, the cost of getting here will not be.
Or fly. Yeah.
Okay, so we got a consensus on that. Anybody else in the public wish to speak? There being none. Mr. Terry, got your walking.
That's a motion.
Okay, the motion. Miss- Go for it.
Go for it. Wagner.
Yes.
Walker.
Yes.
Kimore.
Aye.
Shields.
Yes.
Murphy.
Yes,
My name's on the lab. Thank you.
we're getting closer. Discussions on Director of Finance, Clerk, Treasurer position. I will turn that last item over to City Manager Terry.
Yeah, that's kind of about my impending departure here in September from the city. I was wanting to try to keep moving forward with the filling of my position. And I was looking at, as this has been discussed like about a year ago, when this was coming up, there was a discussion about splitting those two positions. And as much as I hate to see it done, because I think it works that way, just the way things are now, it's not going to happen. So I think it's a good idea to split that position and leave the director of finance treasurer as one position and the clerk as a separate position. And in order to get that process of the hiring process going, so that when Mr. Horn comes in, that the brochures and the ads are already out there, so we can get this process going. And then, of course, all that process will take place once he gets here, as far as reviewing applications and filling the position. I was looking at having city council split the positions, and then with the clerk position being assigned or appointed to the finance supervisor position. And the position, the clerk position, which largely entails elections, entails a lot of staff time, which includes the finance staff time, as well as Sarah Beck. But it's all city staff within the finance side that is either working on it, or if you're not working on it, then you're covering the people who are working on it. So to me, it should be a staff, county finance staff person who has that position. That's why I recommend that. And as we discussed this over a year ago when this was all was going on, I think city council members, certain city council members who have that same mindset. So that's why I was recommending to council tonight to make that appointment. And then I could get moving with the ads and the brochures, et cetera, and fill in my position as soon as possible.
Ms. Walker.
Thank you. Thanks, Al. Would that require us to change our charter, our township, or our city ordinance about how the position, because the position's outlined in the charter, so we
The city charter has a separate clerk and it has a separate treasurer position. But it also has a blurb in there would allow city council to combine those two positions.
So that wouldn't have to be
Nope,
changed or amended or anything.
Yeah, so the charter allows you to have them separate or combined.
Thank you.
Mr. Moore.
Hi, I called Mr. Terry this afternoon. I would respectfully suggest that this decision be deferred to Mr. Horn's assumption of the city manager position. He's coming on board in 2 weeks. And out of respect for his new tenure, and this is with certainly due respect to Al and Audrey Platt, I would just suggest that he be given an opportunity to offer input on this important decision. Thank you.
Mr. Wagner.
Thank you. I agree with that. Al, I remember supporting you so much and not separating these so strongly. And so I would hesitate to do that before the new city manager comes on board, and have you work that out with him and have him come to us. A side question, I think it said something here about going to MML. Did we get out of the contract with HR Gov?
Correct.
I was hoping we would. Okay, thank you for that.
So what are you suggesting?
I'm suggesting that whether we table it or whatever it might be, that we don't make a decision tonight, but provide Mr. Horn the opportunity to work with Al on what his thoughts are as well, since he's got to take it forward.
Mr. Shields.
So for clarification, understanding, Mr. Terry, you're thinking that this process, like so how the rest of the process could take some time, and hence, getting it started right away would facilitate your transition off, right, and put the city in a good position.
Correct.
And then, so Ms. Moore is saying 4 to 3 weeks in the process. Okay.
I also think Mr. Horn's input on, Michigan Municipal League, there's a number of elements here that I just think with this short window before him coming on board, this is a big decision. And I'm sure he'll seek Mr. Terry's counsel. I just think again, out of respect for him, that he should be given that opportunity.
Ms. Walker?
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. So I support waiting 3 weeks.
Mayor.
Yes.
Actually, if I could ask, Al, would you see any reason to not wait? Because obviously you've come with recommendations here.
Correct.
So I'd like to hear from you about your thoughts about having to wait 2 weeks or 3 weeks versus making this decision and following the recommendations for tonight.
Yeah, I think this whole process all along has taken a little longer than what it could have taken. Because we've had to wait a couple weeks here and 6 weeks while people are on vacation. And it's just pushing things back further and further. Being able to get out and get the brochures and things moving quicker, I think would help the process. I think having a new city manager walk in the door and say, okay, how are you going to run the city? How do you think about this position? When he's never been here, he doesn't know how this department runs or how the city runs personally. And say, now maybe we have to make a decision. He might say, well, give me a month. Give me 2 weeks. I mean, I think it's burdensome on Shane Horn to make him do that. Having been here 29 years and seeing how this department is run and how elections are run, and how the staff runs, I think puts me in a position to make that decision with more experience than the new city manager will have for some time. He's going to have to come in and start weighing, well, who are the people? I mean, what's going on? Who does what? And then I don't know if you just give him sit down for an hour and talk about it. Okay, yeah, let's go with that. Or is it going to take some time for him to get his feet wet? And once again, how long is that time period? So I guess to me, it just makes it an easier, smoother transition to do it now than to wait. And then when he walks in the door, there's going to a desk full of stuff that you need to get going on. Stuff here that's happening. And to make that the first thing that he's got to look at and figure out how he wants to, whether to split that position, that's all we're talking about. Because he's going to have to make the decision on who the new employees are, because the whole interview process is going to be his. But I think it's easier and quicker to get it going now. That's all.
I'm okay with splitting it, but I'm listening to you guys.
So the actually hiring the staff, that's not what we're, the city clerk and treasurer, those both manager will have.
The city manager will be totally in charge of hiring the new position of director of finance. All this will be doing is taking the city clerk position and appointing, you'd be splitting it and appointing finance supervisor as the city clerk.
Which would read better for hiring.
Right, because that takes the job duties of clerk and the elections out of the
Finance director.
responsibilities of the director of finance and treasury, keeps it strictly finance oriented, which I think is, if you have somebody, especially if they're out there and they're an accountant or a CPA or whatever, don't know anything about elections, especially with the way things have trended in the last number of years with elections, that could make them not want to apply for the position.
I do remember that was the first recruiter's recommendation that we split because of the difficulty in finding someone for that shared position.
Yeah,
I'm okay with splitting it, but I'm listening to what, it's a 5-person decision on this. I'm okay with splitting it, but I'm looking at you guys. Mr. Wagner?
I still prefer to wait for input from
Okay.
Horn. I think,
All right.
I believe he knows, that's just my opinion, but I believe he knows that number one priority coming in is going to be to replace Ale too. And so that's going to have to, with his stack of stuff, that's going to have to rise up pretty high. Is my sense.
Right, but he is going to have to split if we've already gone through this application, and what do we have? Nothing came out of it, basically.
It didn't, part of his mayor for me, Al, you convinced me to keep it together. And it's hard for me to change course.
Well, quite frankly, it's a foregone conclusion. You have to split the position. You're not going to find a director of finance, clerk, treasurer. Not unless you want to spend at least what you're spending to the city manager. I mean, there's so much, and I'll also say, quite frankly, when I came here as a clerk, the laws and the rules and elections were so much simpler than they are today. It's very involved. And it takes all three of us right here particularly, we kind of concentrate on our expertise as I do part of this, expertise is here, expertise is there as far as what's online and things. And between the three of us, you feel like you got the laws covered. I don't know how a township does it. But I just don't think you're going to hire somebody unless you have somebody who's already a clerk, treasurer, director of finance down the road who wants to come up here. I can't see somebody who's in finance wanting to take on the position of clerk. I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, you have to split the position. It's just a matter, to me, of who you're going to make the new clerk.
Basically, if we don't, then we're waiting to put out the ad, the search. So till June, July, to even get it going. But if you want to wait, then we wait. Okay? There's no other discussion. I mean, unless somebody's changed their mind, let's just wait for 3 weeks. Mr. Shields.
I have changed my mind. So I can make a motion. Yeah, I'm gonna make a motion, if I can entertain a motion, make a motion to separate the positions of clerk treasurer. And then is appointing Ms. Plath as necessary to have, a treasurer. If they're split, we need to have a clerk.
That would be his choice to hire. That's his responsibility to hire who he hires for that.
So the motion and the action I'm making a motion on is just separating the clerk. I'm making a motion to separate the clerk and treasurer position.
Do I have a second?
I'll second the motion, Mayor.
Okay. In that condition, Mr. Shields, you will be voting yes on the vote. You have the option of voting yes or no, just to give you the parliamentary procedure process to that. Discussion, council?
I guess the one item I might add to that is maybe if you made it effective like September 1st.
Will that hold up what we
Right, because then I know that it's split and I can go ahead and advertise.
Gotcha.
But then I can still be a clerk and help Mr. Horn and what have you go in that direction.
Okay. Are you good? So do you wish to?
And that way you don't have to appoint the position until down the road.
Amend your motion?
I amend that motion to Mr. Terry's recommendation.
Do you accept the
I do accept the amendment.
amendment? We have an amendment that would happen September 1st. We would split the two, treasurer and clerk. Any other discussion, council, before we move forward? Does the public wish to express to the council any information? Okay. Sarah, no? Okay. I'm going to Ms. Plath for roll.
Shields,
Yes.
Walker.
Yes.
Demore,
No.
Wagner,
No.
Murphy.
Yes. Moving on. Now we're moving to city council comments, and I'll start with Ward 1, Mr. Moore.
We received, hopefully everybody received a letter from a Michigan Street resident expressing continuing concerns regarding speeding on Michigan. And I know I had mentioned this at our last meeting. I would like to request that Chief Breed provide us an updated report on that secondary speed device used that Mr. Terry referenced at the last meeting when I inquired about it, along with any other efforts that have been undertaken since the last report to address those concerns on Michigan Street about speeding. Would that be possible for
Sure
Chief
can.
Breed to update us? Thank you. That's all I have.
That was just completed, so yeah.
I might want to add to that, there was a concern by Mr. Donnelly, who lives on Epler. Is it Cemetery? Which one?
Apple.
Epler, who sent a letter to council or to myself, to Mr. Terry, the city, complain about the speed of cars going up Epler. And Mr. Terry has already addressed that. And we'll be getting back with Mr. Donnelly on the movement of a speed.
I don't know what they call it, but it's not the sign. Actually, we're gonna put the small block one down first, where people don't know it's there.
To see what
Get a
they're
true
doing.
reading of what it is, and then after that, you can put out the one that has the flashing light, which also tends to help slow some people down. At least you'll get a true read off of the other device.
Okay. We will be Mr. Shields, Ward 2.
Thank you, Mayor. First, I want to thank Planning Commission, our planner, for moving forward these proposals and looking at the barriers to housing. So I thank them for all their time and effort on that. And second, I want to repeat the phrase that I've heard many times in different seminars and webinars, that we have a once in a generation opportunity for the amount of funding that is at the state and federal level to do projects. Again, whether that be something at the Darling Lot, whether that be the new grant that has came out, Safe Streets and Roads for All, is the opportunity to look at, who knows, we get creative and look at ways to do improve walkability and bikeability. So encourage citizen activists, if you have ideas, get out there with form a grassroots group and get an idea together and present it to council. And I'd be glad to be a sounding board for you. And also on a smaller level, there's the Michigan Municipal League Bridge Builders Micro Grant, a grant up to $5,000 to do something to foster community. And so if any community members have ideas to improve space or work with artists in our community, there's a potential for $5,000 to help out your creative idea.
Mr. Ward 3 Wagner.
Mr. Ward. With the proclamation on Arbor Day, I had a neighbor ask if we had any resources to help remove dead trees for people. They've got a neighbor who can't afford to move their dead tree, remove them. I asked them to give me a specific address and I'll get that and find out, but I thought it was and it's on their property, it's not on the city's property.
Ward 4, Ms. Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. Not very many comments other than compliments. The summer activities downtown Petoskey this weekend were really fun. There was lots of live music in the park, and summer in downtown Petoskey was very lively this weekend. So I give lots of props to Becky and her crew and the downtown businesses for just creating an environment that was lively and spirited, and the music that was happening downtown in Pennsylvania Park on Saturday night was really spirit lifting. So I appreciate those efforts. I also wanted to say thank you to the Planning Commission and Zach hitting the ground running, and he's only been here for 2 months. And I really think the focus is finding a house for Zach and his family. So I'm pretty mission oriented, and I'm gonna come up with some creative ideas. I don't have a lot of money, but I know a lot of people.
I think he's already.
He did find a home.
Oh, okay, excellent. Well, that's good to know.
He's not in it yet, but he found it.
And of course, just kudos to the Planning Commission for the amount of work that it's taken to get them to this place. And I see a lot of consensus-based decision-making happening at the Planning Commission, and I have a lot of respect for that. And I think that things are moving forward nicely, and there's so many more things that we could be tackling on the ordinance and zoning levels. So I look forward to those future conversations and making strides in that work. So, and I thank everybody for doing that.
I had the opportunity last Friday night, the Black Coalition from Detroit that were riding their bikes. There were 6 or 7 riders and about 12 a couple of support people with their vans. Met with them at the Carnegie Building from 4 till about 6 o'clock. Was very, very good. They will be coming back through here. They talked of diversity of opportunity for entrepreneurs, and they will be coming back. I invited them to come back again, and I said, you know, people can probably find a place for each one to stay with somebody, just to allow them to have a taste of Northern Michigan. Also, I'd like to thank the group. There was about 12 people. I called people that I knew that had the ability to show up from 9 to noon last Thursday, and we helped. Kendall had a problem with he's still short of staff. So I've got 10, 12 people, and we planted flowers in Pennsylvania Park and handled what he said would have been one day's worth of work. And lastly, you're sitting in seats that third graders sat in last Tuesday. There were 40 of them here. They all had chances to come up, and I give them the opportunity to somebody sit here and call on people, ask their fellow audiences to speak. And we had questions such as, are cars going too fast, not fast enough, or are they just right? How old should you be to jump off the break wall? Fireworks, should they be able to have them all night long? And I said you had to give a reason for your thoughts. It was really, really cool to see these kids go, well, you know, I don't think so, because, and I love the way we allowed kids to come in here and have participation. And the last thing they voted on, the last group that felt they were left out was, do you want Snickers or do you want some other candy bar? And because I passed out candy to them as they walked out the door. So I hope whoever takes over for me someday will continue that process of getting kids in here, because it allows them the opportunity to see what is government. The one big word was agenda. What is an agenda? Because I had a flip chart with agenda on it. Well, the other thing I wanted to say was, you know, none of us agree on everything, but we have to build on what do we have in common, and what do we have, and what do we believe in common, and not build walls because we have issues that we don't agree on, but build bridges and build houses on what do we agree on, because we have much more that we agree on than we disagree on. So thank you for doing your part and not always agreeing, being not afraid to step up and say, I disagree with that. I think that's real healthy for America. And I think if every city had that, every state, every government had that, this place would be a hell of a lot better. No further business come before this council. I call this meeting adjourned. It's 10:30.